Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.
La da 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 da.
This is one of those times.
I'm a fool for you.
Nice. Fool for you. Good one. Always like that one.
Yeah.
Welcome to another
That's
Thursday.
one of my favorite of her intros.
Yep. Got a good snap to it.
Well, we got an interesting topic for tonight. Going from last week where we were looking at psychology and music, got me thinking about child psychology and how music relates to children, how children perceive music and how it affects them.
Absolutely.
Where some of the,
and that's a good field because
it's where some of that psychology we were looking at starts to develop.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And we were talking about like critical windows where there's a certain period in time in child development where being exposed to certain types of music like classical music and things like that can have an effect on people trying to learn music either as children or even later in life. If they heard the music in that critical window when they were younger, some studies say that they'll have an easier time learning music later in life, whether they learned as a kid or not.
Yeah, and that's what I initially had started searching for was, that what you ended up mentioning to me, the Mozart effect, which I wish I had thought of that while I was doing the searching. I initially started with like, what's a musical prodigy? Then Mavi suggested search for Virtuoso. So then I was like, okay, let's see what they think about Virtuoso. And then Savant came to my head. And those were the three that I started to focus on as it developed into, getting to the womb. And like those first couple of years, the theory behind children's music, all those things started to come up in the results.
Yep. And again, it's all about what window you want to look at and what lens you want to look at it through, as far as what exactly, which effects are we looking for specifically? Because sometimes like with the Mozart effect, for example, they talk about it helping with test taking. If you were going to be taking an IQ test or, a standardized test and you were to take it just on one day with no music and then another day you do it after listening to Mozart for a little while, there's a noticeable difference in the scoring because of the way the music, I guess, makes you think about certain connections differently. Could be part
exercises,
of what makes that work. Could also just be that that mindset. Yeah, exactly. So we can look at that as well. Specifically, there's scientific studies on those kinds of things, but in this case, it's more about in general looking at like you said, a wider variety of topics here. Some of it is about the child prodigies themselves. Some of it is about what leads to it. Some of it is about prenatal, like you said, listening to music in the womb, a few different aspects of the topic.
Yeah, and
we'll hear from some of our favorites as well.
Yeah, there's a few that came back this week. Some of these channels kick butt, and
Absolutely.
every week we do get a nice amount of new, fresh channels. Like with these different topics, we're going to see some new channels. This is one, for instance, right at the beginning that might not have normally went to, but given the topic, this channel was interesting to me because it talks about like how a baby develops in the womb and where they start to get some of that like recognition of sound and rhythm, and where in the development that starts to happen.
Mhm.
I
Right.
mean, this one comes from a channel that's specifically for, you know, understanding baby development, Sprouts. A
Hmm.
good name for a channel about babies.
Sure.
And they're going to be talking about prenatal development, what babies actually learn when they're in the womb. And music is
Hmm.
one of them.
Yep.
And then we're going to kind of shift over to what makes children's music, the secret
Mhm.
structure of children's music.
Right.
And this is one of those channels we have been to, on our composing nights, 12 tone. I'm really getting into this channel's sketch approach and explanation
Mhm.
on things. This one's a little more advanced on the music theory. So for those of you out there that are still getting comfortable with theory, it might seem a little more advanced what they talk about, but hopefully it if you're getting used to music theory, the next video will help you to like kind of warm up to the idea of theory. And this one comes from homeschool pop, and you get a good example of the approach they take to getting a kid comfortable with the musical staff and some of the symbols you'll see when you first start learning theory.
Right. And trying not to get intimidated by jumping straight into the deep end of jazz right off
Well,
the
if
bat.
it doesn't intimidate like a 3 or 4 year old, it shouldn't intimidate an adult.
Exactly.
And then this gets to what I was really searching for when I started the hunting for all of this. You know, uh, Child prodigies. That was my initial thought when I started searching, and surprisingly, I couldn't find a lot of videos that described like how you gauge a child to discover a prodigy. A lot of
Mhm.
the videos I found were strangely negative towards prodigies or being a prodigy, and it kind of surprised me. There doesn't
Sure.
seem to be a lot of encouragement to recognize a musical prodigy like that.
In some cases, a lot of parents, the way they talk about their own children, like everybody would be like, "Oh, my child is a prodigy." Like everybody would say it if their kid, does something remotely musical. But the main idea is that I think, as far as the negative connotation or the shying away from encouraging it, is more about for the kids to to feel like they're being forced to
Yeah,
perform. Like, you don't want the kids to feel like they, oh, they have to go on stage. Mom and dad are forcing them to get up on stage and do the thing again because they don't want to. If the kids enjoy it, then by all means have at it. Like, the more encouragement you can give them, the better. But there's a difference between encouraging and
yeah,
forcing. And that's where, to me, it should never be about, making a child sit down and do even if it's oh, you'll thank me later for making you take these lessons. It may be true, but it might also lead to the person not even wanting to take the lessons ever, or not even wanting to be in music ever, because they felt like they were forced to participate in something they
yeah,
didn't want to.
yeah. A lot of the results I saw kind of went like the stage mom a mentality
Mm.
where
Right,
like
right.
all these prodigies are being forced by stage moms, and it, that may be the case in some situations, but at the same time, if the kid does really embrace it, and the parents just kind of letting them, it's not a bad thing either. And I hope that, like, we encourage child prodigies rather than discourage them for the most part.
Right. And again, setting an example for them, giving them access to the things that they want to try. Like if somebody wants to try the trumpet or the piano or the guitar or whatever, it's important to, give them the options to try things. They might decide that, after a month on trumpet that they don't like it, but they might have picked something up from playing it that helps inform the rest of their music on the bass or the guitar or the piano or whatever it is.
I've seen a lot of trumpet players who became guitarists and singers, so it's a gateway
Mhm.
instrument.
Yeah, I played trumpet in fourth grade. I think it was fourth grade for like a half a year, just a little bit of trumpet. But I had the piano lessons before that and throughout that, and then um, you know dabbled with the guitar later on, and then made bass basically my primary instrument about 15 years ago. And still, now whether it's bass or guitar or keys, or I sit down at the drums sometimes, play congas. I just like to just try different things and just being feeling free to experiment. And that's where I think getting better at one instrument made me more adventurous on other instruments and more willing to try different things on other instruments, which makes it seem easier to learn things on other instruments. Besides the fact that guitar and bass are so highly related, the first, the low four strings on a guitar are the same four strings on a four-string bass, same notes, the whole way through. So if you can play a bass, you can play the four fat strings on a guitar and make the same, play the same riffs, the same lines, all that kind of stuff, and make it all work
Yeah,
out.
and having that kind of musical curiosity, even as an adult, is really great. It kind of keeps you young musically.
Yep. You just have to not be afraid to hit wrong notes. Just hit notes, and if it doesn't sound great, that's fine. But you might learn something in the hitting of those notes. Like you figure out, oh, certain intervals sound really nice together, and just start messing around with things and
Yeah,
figure
and
something out.
don't be afraid of instruments. Don't be afraid to try one.
Right.
So
Exactly.
this one comes from Pierre Giorgio Wilson over on YouTube, and it's the 8 levels of child prodigy. It's kind of funny, this one, because it almost takes the approach from a parent's perspective. Like it shows 8 different examples of real prodigies, but like how parents tend to describe them.
Nice.
And then shifting to gifted children, which a lot of times tend to be the prodigies or considered the prodigies. I found this one really interesting because it's a school's approach to providing an art program, a musical art program, in a situation where the school wasn't providing it. So they came up with their own solution and developed their own program, and it's a really
Nice.
cool story. I'd like to see more of this kind of education provide, where sometimes the public schools are lacking. They're pulling the arts out of the public schools because we don't have enough money, and they prioritize in different areas like sports, but yet the arts tend to take a back seat.
Yeah, it's unfortunate
Yeah,
when that
well,
happens.
it's nice to see where, like, some are taking the initiative into their own hands and making sure that these opportunities for kids exist.
Absolutely. And I've seen some even where there are programs for donating instruments to local school systems so that they have them for programs to help with the cost, for example, of trying to run music programs in a school. And anyone who has old instruments like that, that's another good way to try to
Yeah,
help out.
no instrument should ever go to waste. There is a child out there
Right.
that would play it.
Exactly.
So, and then we shift back to virtuosos, which to me is kind of like a gifted child, or a prodigy. A lot of times what becomes the virtuoso starts with that gifted kid or that prodigy. And nobody's going to know better than Rick when it comes to this, because he has experience with a gifted child who really does have incredible abilities, perfect pitch.
Watching, yeah, watching some of those perfect pitch videos from when he was, a small child, were very
Yeah,
impressive.
I almost was going to have a double with him tonight, because there's several videos on his channel that get into this topic of kids that have incredible music abilities, and he's done so much studying on it to understand, Dylan, his kid, and what's going on
Mhm.
there, and he's really become a good voice for explaining this.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
watching some of those older videos and what he would do with Dylan to test like his abilities are incredible.
Exactly.
Now, this one, I kind of stumbled on as I was looking for prodigies, and then Mavi had mentioned virtuosos, and the other term that I thought would be savant. That kid that just is a savant. And surprisingly, when I went searching for this, it's not the meaning that I thought it was. And the stories, the videos that I were seeing were not so much focused on, like, say, a child who's naturally born to be a musician, more so as one who just kind of stumbles on the ability. And this
Mhm.
particular story, Derek Amato, um, there's a lot of different videos out there that cover his story, which is uh, uh, it's one I can relate with. He had a serious head trauma, and afterwards he found a musical ability out of it, something that he had not been before his accident, but yet afterwards something clicked and turned him into a musical savant,
Hmm.
which
Very
I can
interesting.
relate with. I had a head accident when I was 20, and
Mhm.
even though I was involved with music before then, I used to struggle to play. After, it became very easy to just close my eyes, close my mind, and let my fingers go. And I felt like something happened from that head trauma that kind of opened up that ability in a way that I hadn't before.
Hmm. Interesting. To me, I had a bit of a head injury when I was about 17. I fell off a car and landed on my head. It was going about 35
Giant
miles an hour.
stadium.
Giant stadium, yeah. And when I, whacked my back of my head on the pavement and rolled to a stop and all that, I had stitches in the back of the head, concussion, all that kind of fun stuff. But I don't know of any like light switch difference from one to the other. But having survived it and having had that experience, and you can consider it a near death experience, because I mean I could very easily have died during that experience. And coming out of it, there's kind of more willingness to be open to different things, I guess. Just I guess it's kind of like, hey, this is the bonus rounds. Like I could have just been, that could have been the end of everything right there, and now here we are. So I'll try this. Maybe I'll play the tuba and just grab it and try it, because it's like, why not at this point? Rather than it being anything specific in the wiring that got changed, just more of a willingness to do different
Well,
things, I
I
guess.
always suspected that you mentioned wiring got changed. The way our
Mhm.
brains work sometimes, when we damage a part of it, the
Exactly.
brain will compensate in some cases and
Mhm.
start to do the work in other parts of the brain, which
Mhm. Yep.
sometimes can equal like a new skill that you didn't have before when your brain was processing over here.
Because you've either have a new section of the brain that's been assigned to it, or even just the wiring has changed, because by damaging even just a connection between regions, if the overall function is no longer happening, the brain might try to rewire around that, and it might find a more
Yeah.
efficient route,
Well,
for
and
example, or an ability to get to a different section of the brain where there's even more ability to process that
and you know
signal.
how they say like the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain have different approaches to things. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you're if you're right brained, it's they used to say was the creative side, and your left
Mm-hmm.
side is the analytical side. So if
Mm-hmm.
you do shift sides on your thinking, your workload, it's possible you can become creative all of a sudden.
Mhm. I want to say one book that I read that was pretty helpful on that topic was called "Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain." I think was the book, and it was basically a book on drawing. But the idea is to draw with your non-dominant hand. So you're you know if you've never whether you've done drawing or art in the past before or not doesn't really matter. But just taking this exercise and just taking a pen in your opposite hand and doing some drawing exercises. And one of the interesting ones was drawing something with the picture upside down, because like if you're trying to draw a picture of a person sitting in a chair, your brain has a way of, okay, how to make a head, how to make eyes, whatever, but a lot of times you're using models that your brain has wired for you from way back when, but maybe you don't want to use those models. You just want to draw the way an artist would, where you're drawing shadows and lines and things like that, rather than every single element. So by flipping the image upside down, you're tricking your brain. Now you're just looking at this line and how it relates to that line, the darkness of this line over here and the shading over here. And by just flipping an image upside down and drawing it, my ability to draw just like immediately got much better, just by flipping it upside down and not looking at it as a person sitting in a chair, but you're looking at it as the lines and how they relate to each other, and just picking a point, starting and drawing
Yeah,
from there out.
and
But not to sidetrack
well,
things,
and
but
flipping your dominant hand, like they used to say,
yeah.
like left-handed people tend to be the creative ones, right-handed people
Hmm.
tend to be the accountants.
Hmm. Sure. And that's part of it. And lefty is more rare, and some of that is like we talked about earlier. It's kind of a societal thing where things are more geared towards righties. Like if you walk into you walk into a music store and look at all the guitars and basses on the walls, 90% of them or more are going to
Yeah.
be righty as opposed to lefty. I mean, that was one thing where I have a friend who's a lefty who has an entire wall of lefty guitars, and he just has three righty guitars on, two guitars and a bass on the side. And he's like, I wanted people to know what it feels like for us lefties when we walk into a music store and see a whole wall full of things that we
Well,
can't
and
play. and,
right-handed
and there's only a couple we
right-handed
can.
dominance is kind of a modern thing, because left-handed dominance used to be a thing way, way, way back.
Still is. I mean, I still know a bunch of lefties, but it's just more, again, I think just through selection of, people. Some people force their kids not to
Yeah.
be lefty. Like if they start as a lefty, they'll force them, or they'll punish them if they try to be lefty and they want to, or they're trying to use their left hand, and they'll make them use their right hand just so that they'll fit in better in society, or not be, uh, you know, scorned against or whatever. There's not any problems for them as far as access to things as well. Even just, I mean, baseball, not so much, because you can just stand on the other side of the plate,
Well,
not a big deal.
and
But some
when it
sports,
comes to sports, like sometimes the left-handed is the advantage because it's not as common. Boxers, like yeah, the
southpaw, yeah.
southpaws in boxing was always like a advantage.
Hmm. Yep. And for somebody like me, especially, I mean, I have a monster reach already because I'm 6'6". So I'm 6'6" and I have a long wingspan. So if I'm faced off with somebody, and if I go southpaw, if I start fighting lefty, if they try to punch me with their dominant hand, I can just basically jab with my left, and my arm is longer. So like I make contact before they do. So it's like it would at least take all the power out of anything they try to do if they, if I'm able to get the timing right. And that's the whole
Well, I
trick.
don't want to get punched by you.
No, no, most people don't. Plus, also because the punches kind of come down from where I'm standing, because like I'm so much higher than most people anyway. I have to come down, and get compact when you're fighting. But if you're trying to punch down from up here, I mean, there's a lot of power coming down because I have a lot of weight
Yeah,
behind
you
it
could
too.
just
But anyway, I'm not a violent guy.
bonk them.
Yeah, most people have the sense not to try to fight me because I am 6'6".
So we'll be taking a look at a savant here, Derek Amato. WMX Presents put out this one. Like I said, you'll find this story. Many people have covered it. He's an interesting story. And then to finish things off, after we look at like development and what these different types of gifted children are, uh, I love this conversation that they have over at Manned Up Conversations. They're going to talk about, can music have a negative influence on children? Like the other side of musical influence. It can be positive
Sure.
and it can be negative, and they're going to kind of debate on, where music can be, where music can have a bad influence. More
Mhm.
so when kids get older, you know, um, they're going to be talking more about like teenagers and the influence of music that they're listening to, but it does apply to younger children as well.
You kids today and the music you listen to.
Buses taking you to school, we used to walk.
Both ways. Over the highway.
So to start off, we're going to check out the Sprouts over on YouTube, and this is a channel focused on infant development, and they actually explain complicated ideas in simple language.
Right. And this is about prenatal
And
development.
they really go into kids development all over the place. So if any of you got little ones out there and you're trying to like understand your kids, this is a good channel to start.
We're going to learn what babies learn
Well,
in the
here
womb.
we're going to see how babies develop in the womb. And tell me when you think a baby starts to recognize music based on their description, when you think after we're done.
Alrighty. We'll see.
Starts the day your mum's egg meets your dad's sperm. 4 weeks later, your little brain begins to form. Epidemiologist David Barker says that whilst developing inside our mother, we are receiving postcards from the outside world. These postcards tell us if this world is dangerous or safe, if food is plentiful or scarce. Knowing nothing else, we learn from those messages. Let's watch what we experience and learn inside the womb from the fetus perspective. Month 1. Only 24 hours alive, every bit of genetic information is already present in a single cell, from our hair color to our talent as a future pianist. Then we divide ourselves again and again. After around a week, we travel from the ovaries to the uterus, where we then undergo the Great Divide, splitting into two, half of which will become us, while the other half forms the placenta, which brings us food and oxygen and carries away waste. By week 4, we have developed into a small being that is growing at a rate of 1 million cells per second. Our spinal cord, heart and brain are now clearly visible, even if we are just the size of a poppy seed. Month 2. At about week 4 to 5, our heart starts to beat, and we are now 10,000 times bigger than we were at conception. This is a crucial point in our neurological development, as our brain grows at a rate of around 100,000 cells each minute. If our mother consumes alcohol and drugs or experiences extreme stress or trauma, our tiny brain can get damaged. This can lead to maths problems at school or even schizophrenia some 40 years later. If our mum stays healthy and can relax, our brain can develop to its full potential. We are now the size of a raspberry. Month 3. At the beginning of month 3, we start to react to stimuli. Our sense of smell is developing, and exposure to toxins can make us cringe. Our brain is continuing to grow very fast. Our ears start forming, and we can soon hear our mum's heartbeat and voice speak. Still small enough, we have plenty of space to move inside the belly. Our mother's womb becomes our sensory playground. We learn to move our arms, stretch our fingers, smile or suck our thumb. 75% of us are now showing a preference to use the right hand. We are now around the size of a lemon. Month 4. Our head makes up about half our total size. We learn to kick, pee, and how to swallow. Our taste buds are developing. If our mother eats a wide variety of things, we learn to appreciate different tastes and become less fussy eaters later in life. If we receive inadequate or poor nutrients, we adapt our physiology to sustain our development. This process is also called fetal programming. Some researchers have found that this can result in health problems such as obesity, heart conditions, and diabetes later in life. We are now around the size of a big tomato. Month 5. While earlier our mum's voice sounded muffled, now it is starting to become clear. We are also experiencing a big growth spurt, and we start the development of our teeth and our first real hair, fingernails, eyebrows, and eyelashes. We are becoming more active each day and enjoying flexing our tiny muscles. As we wriggle, kick, and turn, our mother will start to feel us moving. If she responds, we learn that for every action there is a reaction. We are now around the size of a dragon fruit. During this 6th month, a major mark of brain development occurs. Our brain's cerebral cortex splits into 2 hemispheres. But it's also an exciting month for our eyes, which open for the first time. Even though we see only blurs, we start to respond to light. Some say it's good if our mum now takes us into the sun. We are now starting to make simple facial expressions, such as forming a grin. We probably learn to communicate for the time when we are born when we want to show our feelings. We are now around the size of a small cauliflower. Month 7. We begin to develop regular intervals for sleeping and being awake. The hair on our head is now clearly visible, and our milk teeth have formed under our gums. When we hear our mum speak, we may respond with an increased heartbeat and movement. Some researchers claim that we now begin to learn language from hearing the voices from outside, because, once born, we seem to show a preference for our dad's and mum's native language. If we were to be born now, we would have a 90% chance of survival and arrive the size of a pineapple. Month 8. We are now behaving like a newborn. Our brain is functional and our nervous system ready. Our lungs are almost fully formed and we are practicing breathing by inhaling amniotic fluid. We now spend almost all of our time asleep, maybe dreaming about our near future. In preparation for birth, most of us will have now turned upside down. To get through that tiny hole at the end of the tunnel, our bones and skull are still extremely flexible. Only the immune system is still in its infancy. It will take many months after birth until our internal bodyguards can fully protect our health. We are now around the size of a melon. Month 9. In the last month, we keep practicing our motor skills and kicks. When our mum laughs, eats sweets, or drinks an iced tea, we might respond by bouncing up and down. If we could already understand research papers, we would now hope that our mum can bring us to the world through natural birth, which protects us through a stronger immune system for life. The puzzle of what is nurture and what is nature is now well underway and already shows a first image of our character. The most important missing piece will be added in our early childhood. At the end of the 9 months, we are around the size of a jackfruit. After many hours of hard labor, we will be welcomed into this world. Some will then be instantly taken away for various checkup procedures and bathing. But if we are lucky, we will first spend some time with our mum. If placed on her belly, we will instinctively crawl to her breast and then show our sucking skills. This makes us happy, full, and feel safe, the foundation for all future learning. Millions of students from all around the globe have watched our Sprouts videos for better learning. Thousands of teachers play them in their classrooms to start projects. Volunteers on YouTube have translated them to over 25 languages. Our mission is to promote learning by doing in classrooms around the world. If you are a great explainer and a passionate teacher and you want to help us develop outstanding content, contact us. To support our channel with a donation, visit patreon.com/sprouts.
Wow, I love their mission.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Interesting stuff.
it's as educational for a kid to watch as an adult.
Mhm.
Turns out you
Oh,
were
yeah.
a Jack Melon when you came out.
And at one point, just a little lemon.
Or a tomato.
But when I was the size of a raspberry, though, I was a big raspberry.
Well, during that whole evolution, where do you think music starts to play a part of it?
Well, it depends if we're saying part developmentally. I mean, as far as being able to recognize it or um, react, shall we say, to the stimulus would be early on, like when they first mentioned music in the developmental process. I think it was the third month they mentioned.
That
But
was where I started thinking like there's got to be some musical recognition in that third month.
somewhat, but then I don't think there's much to it until later on when they talk about the difference in hearing mom's muffled voice to then hearing it more clearly. I think at that point is where the where you're actually receiving the music is actually getting now sophisticated enough to be able to appreciate it more. Where I think previously it was more just reacting to the initial, on-off stimulus kind of thing. At this point, it's more reacting to what it is musically.
Yeah, the 3 months that stood out to me, the third month, the 6th month, and the 7th month. Those 3 months, there's a lot of sensory, like almost overload coming at the baby, and those are the months where I think like sound and development they're windows of opportunity.
Yeah, and again, so much of it depends on the environment that your mother is in when you're in there. As far as what's going on, is it a noisy apartment? Is it a nice, tranquil, spot on a lake? Is it peaceful all the time, or is there yelling and screaming all the time? I mean, all these things factor into those times as well. Like recognizing where the music is able to be recognized. You also recognize how much they can read from the intention of vocalizations from one person.
They mentioned the possible consequences of a mom that's too anxious or, consuming things that are not healthy for the baby and could have an adverse effect 40 years later.
Yep, indeed. It's large consequences later on for small actions. Yeah.
That's why a good parent needs to be conscientious of these things. So that was at Sprouts over on YouTube, and they've got a website, patreon.com/sprouts. I love their mission. I think for those of you who have a little one on the way, there's some interesting information here to help you in development there.
Absolutely.
Make some musical babies, everyone.
Need more musical babies.
Now, when it comes to making music for babies and for children, I wanted to include this one. I love 12 Tone. I like their sketch approach. It's another one where like the information makes more sense with the way that the narration that he does to it, and everything comes in pretty clear for me on this channel. This one's a little more advanced on the music theory. He's going to get into like some advanced music theory, but it's also how like music works when it comes to writing music for children.
Yeah, definitely a fan of the channel.
Yep, this one's at 12 Tone over on YouTube. Another one with patreon.com/12 Tone videos. Something music theory.
Exactly.
And they're not bullshitting. There's a lot of theory on this site. That's why I keep going back to it.
In this case, we're going to take a look at the secret structure of
It's
children's
not a
music.
secret anymore.
No, shh, don't tell anybody. Shh.
Sponsored by Skillshare. Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. I've been thinking a lot recently about children's music. Why are there these songs that we all seem to grow up knowing, and what is it about them that made them so appealing to us as kids? I spent a bunch of time digging into it, and it'd be a shame to let all that work go to waste, so today I thought I'd share my results and maybe explain a bit about how to go about answering these sorts of questions in general. So the first thing we need to do is decide which songs we're actually gonna look at. There's plenty of ways to approach this, but in the end, the inclusion criteria I settled on was my own personal experience. I got some help from Twitter to make sure I didn't miss anything obvious, then I compiled a list of 26 songs that I remembered from my own childhood. There's a full list in the comments if you're curious. Of course, this approach isn't without flaws. I grew up near Boston, so my experience is biased towards songs popular in the United States and more specifically New England. That's not damning or anything. Every decision here has trade-offs, and I think my list is going to be pretty familiar to many of you, but it's always worth recognizing the limitations of your study. Anyway, let's get the obvious observation out of the way. These songs are simple. Shocking, I know. But what's interesting, I think, is the ways in which they're simple, and as we'll see later on, the ways in which they aren't. For starters, they all use the major scale. Well, not all, but of the 26 songs I looked at, only Ants Go Marching used minor, so the consensus seems to be that kids love major. But I was actually expecting even less complicated tonality. I thought I'd see a lot of major pentatonic, which is when we take the major scale, and drop the two most dissonant notes, getting a 5-note scale that's almost entirely settled. It's the simplest scale in Western music, so I expected to see it in Western music's simplest songs, but only 4 of the pieces I looked at were strictly pentatonic. That doesn't mean those dissonant notes were just running wild, though. While 19 of the 25 major songs included the 4th note of the scale, only 10 of them used the 7th, and only 8 used both. So while very few of the songs were pentatonic, most of them weren't using the full major scale either, and there was a significant bias towards the less disruptive 4th. Another reason the 4th was more popular may have to do with range. 11 of the songs have melodies spanning a major 6th or less, including 8 that specifically run from the root of the key to the 6th note, which means the range of the song just doesn't include the 7th on either side. Of the 14 songs with a range of less than an octave, only 3 of them use that 7th note. It's much more common in songs with wider ranges, likely because those are intended for more advanced singers anyway. Of course, wide is relative here. Only 3 songs stretch over an octave, and even then only barely. The broadest range comes from Frere Jacques, which runs from the 5th below the root to the 6th above, for a total range of an octave plus a whole step. That's not nothing, but as a point of comparison, professional singers tend to have at least 2.5 to 3 octaves, so they'd be able to sing Frere Jacques fairly comfortably in any key. Another thing that caught me by surprise in these songs was the melodic structure. I went in expecting a lot of stepwise motion where the melody walks smoothly up and down the scale, but almost all the songs include fairly significant leaps, with 14 of them jumping by at least a perfect 5th. However, after seeing this over and over, I started to notice a pattern. The melodies were mostly leaping back and forth between the root and the 5th of the scale, like in Baba Black Sheep or the Itsy Bitsy Spider. That interval was incredibly common. Of the 26 songs I looked at, 10 of them started with it right away, and only Mary Had a Little Lamb didn't include it at all. So why was it so common? Well, that brings us to the point of children's songs, enculturation, or the ways in which we pass on cultural knowledge. My world music teacher explained it like this: who taught you how to sing Happy Birthday? If you grew up in the United States, odds are no one did. You probably just heard it over and over at birthday parties until you absorbed it on your own, and if someone did sit down and teach you the melody and lyrics, it probably happened before you were old enough to start forming memories, so effectively you've known the song your entire life. But in addition to passing on specific songs, enculturation can also pass on broader ideas about what the fundamentals of music are, and there's not much more fundamental in Western music than the relationship between the root and the 5th. They're the 2 most important notes in any given key, and emphasizing their relationship in children's songs helps pass that value on to the next generation. Of course, this isn't really an intentional process. We're mostly just writing things we think are easy, but seeing what we think easy is tells us a lot about the culture that produced the music. This process of enculturation can even transform songs. For instance, when I went to find transcriptions of the song That Never Ends, the melody I found was completely different from the one I remembered. Fortunately, this is one of the few songs on my list recent enough for us to have recordings of the original performances, so I went and looked those up, and it turns out the version I learned is wrong. The song passed through various groups of children, and in doing so it changed, but those changes weren't random. Almost every difference between my version and the original involved adding features that are common in other songs I looked at, like a smaller range and a more common lowest note. Which brings me to my next topic: the lowest note. While the highest notes of the songs don't show any real pattern beyond a slight preference for the sixth, the lowest notes are stunningly uniform. 12 of the songs bottom out on the root and 11 more stop at the fifth. This is basically just another way of emphasizing those important notes though, so I won't dwell on it for too long. Instead, let's look at another melodic feature, static motion. This is where the melody just sits still, like in Farmer in the Dell, where we hit this root 5 times before we start moving. This is helpful in children's music because it's easy to sing. You get a bunch of words out without needing to change notes. I was curious exactly how common it was, but first I had to define it in a way that I could measure. The definition I went with is that it's static motion if the same note is sounded 3 or more times in a row over the course of longer than a single beat. So Farmer in the Dell would count, but this section of Row, Row, Row Your Boat wouldn't because the notes are going by too fast. I then went to see how many of these static sections each song had, and 17 of them had at least one. Most of them had no more than 2 or 3 though, because of another important feature. These songs are short. Like really short. 22 of them are 8 bars or less, and 9 of them are teensy little 4-bar patterns. Of course, a lot of these songs repeat, so performances can last much longer, but the actual melodies are tiny, probably because asking children to remember whole 32-bar forms is a bit of a stretch. Or is it? Well, most of the songs are short. There's one on my list that's a full 40 bars long. I've been working on the railroad. This is actually an outlier in a lot of ways. Its rhythm's more complex than most, its range is one of the largest on my list, and it's one of only 4 songs to feature notes from outside the key. Outliers can be dangerous to this sort of analysis. It can be tempting to draw conclusions from them, but there's usually a reason most of your other data points are so different. Still, it's a nice reminder that none of these rules are absolute. Speaking of outliers, one thing that pops up occasionally is rounds. These are songs where everyone sings the same melody but starts at different times, like Frere Jacques or Row 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 Your Boat, and while it may not seem like it since we grew up singing them, this is actually pretty tricky. I mean, think about it, you've got up to 4 different melodic parts happening at the same time, and you have to track your place in them without getting lost. Plus, since the lines harmonize, it's much more important to sing in tune or the whole thing collapses. There's at least 5 rounds on my list, and I think the fact that we expect children to be able to handle them is pretty noteworthy. So where does that leave us? How do you write the next great children's song? Well, it's hard, or rather, it's super easy, which is what makes it hard. There's not a lot of options left that haven't already been done, which probably helps explain my last observation. These songs are old. Of the ones I could find dates for, only 9 come from the 20th century and only 1 from the last 50 years. They've changed and evolved over time, with new generations of children adapting them and passing them on, but by and large they're the same songs our parents learned, and they're probably the same ones our kids will too. Still, if you want to try writing a new one, we've learned some helpful tricks. Keep it short, write in major, skip the 7th, jump between the root and the 5th at some point, and it probably wouldn't hurt to write lyrics about some sort of animal either. But the real value of this study, I think, is what it tells us about Western music as a whole. It shows us the rules we never knew we learned and the ones we're passing on implicitly to our kids, and it exposes the cultural underpinnings of our most fundamental ideas. In the end, it may not be that children's songs sound simple. Instead, it might just be that simple sounds like children's songs. And speaking of fundamentals, let's talk about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with over 20,000 classes in just about everything. One class I've been watching recently is about making music for video games. It's called Exploring Game Music, and it's been really interesting to learn more about how video game music is made and how it differs from other kinds of composition and production. If that sounds cool, or if you want to check out their thousands of other classes, you can get 2 months of premium membership for free just by being one of the first 500 people to click the link in the description, and if you want to keep going after that, it's just $10 a month. While you're there though, make sure to explore outside the music section too. Skillshare has great classes on cooking, computers, and art to name a few, all of which you get unlimited access to with that free premium membership they're offering. I mean, I know we all love music, but it never hurts to pick up a few other skills too, right? Anyway, thanks for watching and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.
Oh, we are going to cover video game music one night, and I will check out
Yes,
what
we are.
he's got.
Keep on rocking.
Yeah, that is definitely a theme
Absolutely.
coming up. But man, he blew my mind there at the end when he summed it up and said, "It's not that children's music is simple. It's that we associate what sounds simple to children's music." I think he hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, well, also the intervals is the one that I was thinking of before we even started. Is focusing on certain intervals, like the fifth, like we were saying.
What this
So many of
the
those
six
songs,
five,
the
the six and the
bottom out,
five were the two.
right? The low note being the fifth or the root most of the time, like on so many of the songs, because they're emphasizing the root and the fifth are the two most important tones of the scale, and those are the ones that make you feel most centered in that key.
See, and
That made a lot of sense.
I think I went into that like he might have at first, where there's this assumption that like making the music for children is something that's going to be simple, but as you saw, there's some complexity in keeping within that structure.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
I really was surprised to see it was more complicated than I initially thought it would be to make songs that we associate, to those children's songs. And as he mentioned, most of them are very old. They're ones that have stuck around so long because in their simplicity to our ears, they survive generations after generations.
And they teach different things, like you said about the rounds and being able to keep the rounds going. That's teaches some complex timing things as well as harmonizing, all that kind of stuff, all together in one thing. So there are different lessons that can be learned from different songs. So you can see why they would focus on, when they're teaching music to children, why they would focus on getting certain songs in there. And when we also talked about intervals in the past, talking about how Here Comes the Bride versus Twinkle Twinkle Little Star versus like whichever different songs, like certain songs that are very simple that you can just look at the intervals of the jump of the first note to the second note that you can identify. And then when you hear those intervals later, you can identify, oh, it's from that song. So I know that that's a fifth, or I know that that's a fourth, or I know that that's a third.
And the use of a repeating note, twinkle, twinkle, using that same note a couple of times, that was interesting to me because like he had mentioned, I always thought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up and down would be like the kids' approach to melody, but it really is more like single, 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 change, jump, and to a fifth or to a sixth. Typically, the fourth was the other one that I found interesting. Its lack
The
its
one
lack
for
of use.
Sure. One the do re mi is one, do a deer. You're doing the 1 2 3, so 1 2 3 1 3
Yep.
1 3. So just doing like working your way up like that, a song like that, trying to teach people if they're trying to sing, that helps them get those couple note runs together and be able to fit them together and understand how to move that key center. Like all those kinds of principles are getting conveyed at the same time that they're learning a simple song.
The one thing that didn't surprise me was the major being the dominant.
Yes.
One minor song out of those that he picked.
Exactly. That didn't surprise me either.
No. That's one that I always assumed, like, children's music tends to be brighter and major is just easy to pull that off.
I would even suggest that a lot of them would be in C major and or G major as very common keys.
Although,
but
don't be afraid of A major. It's an awesome major too.
I'm not afraid of any of them. We talked before about doing some circle of fifths exercises, going around doing like a 2-5 or not a 2-5-1, but like a 1-6 or 1-5-6-4, rotation, and you do that in each key going around a circle of fifths to get yourself into the motion of doing all of those. Because on guitar, it's a different story than on keyboard. On guitar, you'd be doing the same thing and just sliding up or down, a couple of frets, or using different variations of the chords. But with keyboard, you're actually doing different fingering because you're doing different numbers of sharps
well,
and flats.
it forces you to recognize the actual intervals of your claw. So
right.
you have to do a little counting at first just to get used to shifting up with the keyboard. You got to count
but
out
once
your
you go through it, I
intervals.
mean, But knowing that you've got, 12 keys to go through, like once you get through that exercise, you already know some of the keys are super easy and a lot of the keys are very similar to each other. It's like, oh, this one's just like that one, but with this, you're making one adjustment to what you were doing already. Once you get comfortable with that and once you can get through it more smoothly, and there's only 12 of them. So once you go through all 12 of them, basically any song in any key, you'll be able to more easily shift into that because you've played it in an exercise like that before.
When it comes to keyboard claws, they do change a lot more than on guitar, but once you get used to all the keyboard claws there, they start to settle in.
Exactly. And again, there's different ways of doing it, whether you're doing shell chords and things like that, but we can get into that another time.
We will get into that another time. So that was at 12 tone. Awesome channel. Again, more advanced than I was expecting, looking for children's music. It surprisingly made me think a lot about structure.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I like about it.
That's what I love about the channel. He's great at his musical analysis. He does it like a scientist would, like he got his songs that he wanted to analyze for this particular situation and came up with a good conclusion.
Yep. And recognized the limits of it, before he even started the study, which is also important.
Yeah. And recognizing the bias of I grew up, on this kind of children's music in Boston. You're going to hear different music depending on where you are in the world.
Exactly.
And
music is all around
us. Speaking of, music is all around us. And
it's over there.
I came to this one because I wanted to see an actual approach to teaching kids and how some are trying to do that. And Homeschool Prep is a channel, for parents that are going the homeschool route and need some guidance on, how to teach this or teach that. This is an awesome channel. And, it focuses on the youngins. So this particular example that we're going to look at is, how to approach music theory when you're dealing with a young child, 4 years old, 5 years old. You might be starting some of these things with a kid. And a lot of this might seem basic for, some of us, oh, I already know that. But look at the way they're trying to introduce it to a kid and explain it.
For me, the biggest one would be pentatonics, just starting from minor pentatonic and major pentatonic and being able to recognize and sing, or on an instrument be able to play, just very simple versions. And one simple example is on the piano, just hitting the black notes, and if you start from the E flat, you're hitting all the black notes, you're basically doing E flat minor pentatonic. And if you start from the G flat, you're doing all major pentatonic. And it's just nice and easy because you don't have to know anything about theory. You can just go to a piano and just hitting the black notes. You can go up and down all the black notes, and you'll find that if you're starting and ending on that one, it'll sound like a minor pentatonic thing. And if you're starting and ending on that one, it'll feel like a major pentatonic thing. But being able to recognize that and the ease of being able to do that on a piano just by hitting the black notes makes it easy for someone to approach, and especially a child would be happy to approach a piano and just hit the black notes and be able to hit that and have it sound like something that's intentional, and there's no wrong notes because they're all the right notes because they're all right there.
If you can get this 5-year-old upstairs to do it, then you're hired.
There you go. It's about just saying, hey, what do you think about these? And you have them hit those three and those two, and then you can just kind of, doesn't really matter which ones you hit or land on, you can just hit all of them.
Well, if you can get them to pick up the instrument, that's the first battle.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's not about, again, it's about having them be interested in it. So to me, it's about I would be more playing the instrument and have them, come in and be like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And have them come over and be interested in what I'm doing on the
Well,
instrument.
a lot of
And
times,
makes it easier.
they'll come to you curious. Like,
Mhm.
I know when I'm playing and there's little kids,
Mhm.
they're always curious. Like, what
Yeah,
are you
exactly.
doing? What's that big machine you're playing with?
Yep. At one of our gigs a couple weeks ago, the drummer's niece and nephew showed up, and they were young teens, and they showed up to come over and hang out by the drum kit, and they got a couple pictures of them with all the lights on and everything, because we had the light bar set up, and the strobe lights and all that kind of stuff going on. So they had oh yeah, in the middle of the stage and all that. The guitars over here and bass over there and
Oh,
all that
and
kind of
when you
stuff. So
see a teen who's curious like that, you might have a
mhm.
potential musician there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Good stuff.
So let's see how a staff and basic sheet reading is introduced to a child.
Mhm. Music theory for kids.
Music. Incredible sounds that can move us. Literally, you can dance while you listen to music. Music can brighten your day. Music is in movies, TV shows, and of course, homeschool pop videos. Music is all around us. In this video, we are going to learn some awesome things about music, starting with this. Wait, it's just 5 lines, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What does this have to do with music? It's just 5 lines. Well, this is where music is written, where musical notes live. It is called a staff. That's right, a staff. And yes, it is 5 lines. But on and around those 5 lines, some really special things happen. So, these 5 lines are called a staff. A staff. Now you might be thinking, I know what a staff is. That doesn't look like a staff to me. Maybe when you hear the word staff, you think of a walking stick. For example, this is a staff. Or maybe when you hear the word staff, you think of people who work together in a company or an organization. Well, that is called a staff too. Staff can mean many things. In music, these 5 lines are called a staff. And a staff is always 5 lines. Never 4 or 6, always 5. Ooh, here we have another staff. We know it's a staff because it's got 5 lines. But what are these symbols? What do these symbols mean? Well, this first symbol is called a treble clef. Wow, that's interesting. A treble clef. Can you say treble clef? Treble clef. Wow. This other symbol is a note. A musical note. Okay, so this symbol is called a what? Yeah, a treble clef. And notice a treble clef almost looks like a G, doesn't it? That's an interesting symbol. This musical symbol is called a treble clef. Okay, so this musical symbol that looks like a G is called a treble clef. Cool, but what does it actually do? I mean, does a treble clef take its dog on relaxing walks on the beach, enjoying the waves, the sun, and the exercise? Or does a treble clef go on long bike rides, exploring trails and racing past plants and woodland creatures along the way? Or does a treble clef read for hours? Because the treble clef knows that with the tools we get from learning, we can make a huge difference in this world. No, but that would be awesome. Actually, the treble clef helps us figure out what specific notes are on the staff. That is what the treble clef's job is, and it's an important one. It helps us figure out the notes. The reason it is so important is because treble clef is not the only clef in town. Uh-oh. This musical symbol is called the bass clef. This is what the bass clef looks like. The bass clef almost looks like an ear with 2 dots on the outside. The notes on the bass clef are much lower, and the notes are different line by line than the notes on the treble clef. Okay, let's review some of what we've already learned. What is this called? Yes, a staff. A staff. Now look really closely at the staff. Take a picture of it with your mind. We are going to ask you a question about it in just a moment. Okay. How many lines are on a staff? How many lines are on a staff? There are 5 lines on a staff. A staff has 5 lines. That's great. All right. What is this musical symbol called? Yes, it is the treble clef. The treble clef. Remember, the treble clef kind of looks like a G. Great. How about this symbol? What is this called? Wonderful. The bass clef. The bass clef. The bass clef looks like an ear with 2 dots on the outside. You did an awesome job. Way to go. Okay, now we are going to put what we've learned together and look at some actual music so we can learn even more. First, notice all of the staves. There are 4 staves here. They are in groups of 2. Each group has the treble clef on the top staff and the bass clef on the bottom staff. When 2 staves are connected, they are called a grand staff. A grand staff. There are 2 grand staves on the screen. That's pretty cool. Now, you might have noticed some letters on the screen. That's a little strange, right? What letters do you see in this music? Yes, the letters F and P. These letters are really special in music. They tell you how loud or how soft the music should be played. The letter F is short for forte. Forte means loud. Loud. So when you see the letter F in music, it is telling you to play the music loudly. The letter P is short for piano. Piano is not only an instrument, it can also mean playing softly. So when you see the letter P in music, the music is telling you to play softly. P is short for piano, and piano means playing softly. The letter M is also sometimes used along with the P and the F, or you may see more than one piano or more than one forte. It can vary, but remember, F means play loudly and P means play softly. Okay, now it's time to talk about notes. Notes. You need notes to play music. Notes live on the staff. There are lots of different types of notes, but in this video we are just going to learn 3. The type of note tells you how long the note is to be played. The top note is called a whole note, which makes sense. It has a big hole in it. A whole note lasts 4 beats, or claps. The middle note is a half note. It looks like a whole note, except it is attached to a long stem. A half note lasts 2 beats. It is played half as long as a whole note. The bottom note is a quarter note. It looks like a half note, except the hole is filled in. It lasts just 1 beat. Let's listen to each one, and you will be able to hear the difference. Here is a whole note. Okay. Here is a half note. Great. And here is a quarter note. Yeah. One more time. A whole note. A half note. And a quarter note. Awesome. Okay, we've learned so much in this video. We learned that this is a staff, this is the treble clef, and this is the bass clef. We learned that in music, P means play softly, and F means play loudly. We learned that when two staves are connected, it is called a grand staff. And we learned 3 types of notes. This top note is what type of note? Yeah, a whole note. It lasts 4 beats. What is this middle note? A half note. A half note is 2 beats long. And what is this bottom note? Great, a quarter note. Yes, a quarter note is only 1 beat. There is so much you can learn about music. In this video, we just talked about some music basics. We hope you had fun and that this will be the beginning of a great adventure learning about music. As always, special thanks to our patrons. We appreciate your support so much. If you would like to be one of our patrons and get some homeschool pop tattoos, just click the link below this video or visit homeschoolpop.com. We hope you had a great time learning with us. You are so awesome. We'll catch you next video.
I learned that Glenn owns the treble clef. That's why it looks like a G.
That's right. It's the G. That's why.
Which ironically, I would have
But I
figured
also-
you'd own the bass clef, but
That's the thing. That's the one I usually would own from playing the bass.
sounding like the bass.
Exactly. Some good stuff there. Getting some basics.
Well,
covered.
if you had a little one, how old would you wait for them before you started to introduce this kind of theory?
Well, it really depends, to be honest. It comes down to the interest, and I would be surrounding myself with music with a child in the house. So it would basically just be music all the time. And if we wanted to talk about theory, when they start talking about, or when they start looking at actually making music
When they want to learn,
and again, starting from
when
very
they
light.
want to learn a song and you're about to give them some sheet music, I'd say 5 years old, somewhere's between like 4 and 5. If you got a kid that's starting to show writing skills without being actually pushed it in school, if they're starting to write, introduce them to the staff and they'll probably learn how to read music the same way they're learning how to read books.
We basically were started our piano lessons very young. I mean, I'm sure it was, under 4 years old, maybe even. It's one of those things where having music in the house all the time and, seeing that, dad's playing music and there's, sheet music that's open and he's reading from the sheet music and turning it into the song that he plays on the piano. And we're watching that happen. So like you want to, start participating. So you come up and you sit on the bench and you start hitting the keys and then it's, that one, that's that one, and you start, from very basic stuff. And then when you get into the actual piano lessons, it's more about learning, like we said, like learning the different scales and getting comfortable with being able to play even, playing from 2 octaves. So you start down low and play 2 octaves, both hands together, and then split out 2 octaves and then back in and then up and then down and out and then in and then down again, and getting comfortable with all those changes. Because again, with whatever key you're playing in, if you're playing in a key that has, 3 sharps, then you need to be comfortable with being able to run up and down the keyboard with both hands at the same time, hitting different notes in that key and getting comfortable with getting fast at those fingerings. Because when you see some people like Nare Soul and the way she plays, for example, like she'll blow me away any day with what she's with, the speed with and accuracy with which she plays. And that just comes from so much repetition over time.
And you're going to get 2 different kinds of kids in those situations. You're going to get the ones that see you reading something and they want to figure out like how to read. And then you're going to get the ones that see you doing it and they memorize the song simply by watching it played.
Or by hearing, like once they start, depending on how their ear is starting to
If
develop.
they're
Because developing a good ear is super
if
helpful
they're
too.
comfortable with the instrument they're playing and they recognize intervals and they hear it, you might have a prodigy at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
they're comfortable enough with the instrument that they start to relate what they're hearing to what they're playing. If you
Hmm.
see that at a young age, like you've got a kid that's like ready to own that instrument.
Hmm.
And that
Indeed.
actually leads us to like the next video and recognizing when you've got a prodigy. Like every parent wants to believe like their kid's a prodigy at something, and in the music world, you know, for them to even play sometimes is enough for a parent to be like, my kid's a prodigy, he's playing an instrument.
Yeah, exactly. But there are different levels for
Yeah,
sure.
and what's kind of funny with this video is it does take that kind of perception approach where all the examples he shows sound like, a parent saying this kind of prodigy or that kind of prodigy. And
Mhm.
it's how we recognize kids that really have that ability.
Mhm.
And you will see some kids in this that definitely have that ability.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
This is
he's a
coming.
piano man.
There you go.
P- Pierre Giorgio. Pierre Giorgio. I hope I got it right. Wilson. That's
Hmm.
his at over on YouTube. Oh, when you practice, we are all isolated. Everybody in a little box.
Hmm.
Oh,
It's important to play with other
he's
people.
a
Yeah.
thinker, and probably was a child prodigy himself. That might be what led him to his interest here.
Hmm. And then this one, 8 levels of child
That's a
prodigies.
lot of kids.
That's true. Let's see.
So interesting. So I'll just think about it for a few.
Oh, please, yes.
Oh, no need to apologize. I'm jealous.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. No, excellent, excellent playing skills right there for sure.
They're mind blowing, and there
Crushing.
was a couple of them that I was like feeling like was seeing a little Glenn.
Yeah, and actually, one of them you were seeing my dad because the fantasy impromptu, the one he was
That's the
playing
one
that,
that
like my
reminded
dad.
me, the little kid with the glasses.
Yeah, yeah. I think that my dad played that one when he was I don't know 13, 14, something like that. But he had a couple of them that he played when he was that one and one of the ones that's 13 pages long, like just one of those that he has to play from memory. And he was an only child, my dad, and played piano and took piano lessons very seriously throughout his throughout his childhood. So he was playing serious pieces when he was a young man. And again, when we were kids, there was just their piano music in the house all the time. So that's something that always brings me back whenever, especially I hear
I
Chopin,
was going to say it
especially. But
explains your ability to play Chopin.
because those were ones I focused on too. The C major, C minor, and C minor and A major preludes were two of the ones that we played for the most part. The C major one is the one that you've seen me play, which is like big loud chords, and the A that was the C minor. The A major one is the one that was a little bit more quiet, little pianissimo. It's one that it would take me a little bit more. I'd have to remind myself again, like I can hear parts of it and I just like start playing it, and then that's how I usually start into a piece, and I can in a few minutes figure it out if it's one that I played enough way back when, just because the muscle memory is there, and as soon as I start into it I can get into that groove. But then if I forget, I have no idea where I'm going, and if I just had the music in front of me, it would take me a while to figure out from the music. But if I just
So
play the first couple of notes and think
you
about
were
it, I
one
can
of
get it.
those ones who did memorize, who did like learn from seeing and memorize and got it crammed into your head.
Somewhat. Like I did learn how to read back then, so like when I was taking piano lessons I was better at reading, but still it was never something where I could just throw a sheet music up in front of me and be very fluid or fast with reading it. I would have to struggle through and be like, okay, this chord, and then figure out the timing, and then kind of put it together and all mechanically, and then hear how the song goes, and then kind of put that, oh, so that's how it goes, and then get the groove of the song and kind of map that to what I figured out of the
Yeah,
notes.
the rare few who can actually read fast enough to play in real time, they're the ones who
Mhm.
go to orchestra. They're the ones who join orchestras.
Well, in some cases, it has to do with the landmark system. Like even just looking at those four notes that you have on the screen right there, you can see that since there's no sharps or flats listed on the key by the staff, then that's telling you that you're in C major, C major, A
You got
minor. The first note there,
flat in there.
well, that's on a particular note. That's not saying that we're in that key. So what we have is the first note there is a B. That next one's an A. That top one or the third one is an E flat, and the last one is a G. Just based on what I remember of the landmarks. And there was the whole, when you're looking at the lines starting from the bottom going up, it would be every good boy deserves fudge.
Mhm.
So you've got the E at the bottom, so the G is the second one, so you can see that last one over there is a G. The third line is a B, so you can see that one over here. That E flat up at the top there, if you look at the spaces between the lines starting at the bottom, would be F A C E, so you get that E flat at the top. But it's once you recognize those, it's easier to pick out the individual notes, but it's also as far as reading music quickly, landmarks or understanding if you see a couple of those notes together and seeing what the intervals are, like recognizing a third and what a third looks like, and whether it's if whether a note is flatted or sharped or whatever, recognizing what the intervals are makes it a lot easier to landmark yourself with these chords, because you're looking at the lowest note because you want to know where the lowest note is to anchor,
So
because that'll be
if you can calibrate at the beginning of the progression, seeing
mhm.
the interval differences, once you're
Mhm.
calibrated at the start, makes it easier to read fast because you're just
Yes.
looking at the jumps.
Exactly. And also some of the music will show you, what the chords are. Like, they'll have chord stamps for other instruments, for example. So it might say, F, A minor, and, C or whatever. It might say above each one as you're going through. And that'll give you the, let you know at least what the key center is, or what your,
I
what
like
your
seeing
most likely chords are
I
going to
like
be.
seeing those chords above the
Mhm.
staff.
Yep.
It helps me a lot.
Exactly. And I mean, if I'm looking at guitar music, that's the thing, is like if you're looking through music that was written for guitar, for example, it could be tab, but if it tells you those chord stamps and it shows you, oh, here's an F sharp minor, and here's, an A major or whatever, like, exactly what you're doing, because, oh, okay, boom, I've got that chord stamp. I know I can use, these tones from that scale, during that measurement,
Yeah.
at least. Good stuff.
Now we know what to look for that little Rachmaninoff.
Oh, crazy,
The
right?
reincarnation of Rachmaninoff, Prodigy. Like these are,
Mhm.
I think, the kids that really come out the womb like, I am Rachmaninoff. I'm back.
And again, a lot of it comes down to the having the time and the opportunity to play that much, to have in a lot of cases it has to do with having a teacher that was able to get them to that level quickly enough. Some of them, they
Well,
just like you said, it just happens where they just give them a piano and they just start doing that stuff on their own. But a lot of cases it involves a teacher that's able to feed them exactly what they need to get those steps of progression
yeah,
that
I
quickly.
feel that kid like is most likely like what Mozart was. Like, I'm
Hmm.
here to reinvent music.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember doing the doing piano recitals when I was taking piano lessons as a kid. So it was important. Like that to me, like the earliest memories of getting on stage and doing stuff was things like piano
Mhm.
recitals. So not being afraid to get out in front of people and doing things like that meant that when I started playing bass, this many years later, I have no problem jumping up on stage. Going to an open jam somewhere and just being like, yeah, I'll jump up and just jump up with people I've never played with before and play some music.
Yeah, and
It's a lot of
there's
fun.
incentive for parents who want to encourage a child, especially young ones, to get into music. You're also helping to encourage them to be more social, to go through the
Mhm.
experience of performing for any kind of size audience. It it
Yep.
helps a child develop in an important way where if they don't do that in those critical years, that's where they might go into their teens being a little antisocial or more introverted.
Mhm. Or just different interests, even sports or whatever. Something sidetracks them from music, and then later on maybe they develop that interest. And that's where again it's more of exposure to and interest in music during certain periods for access to it at any point
Yeah,
later in life. Because if you ever decide to go back and learn, they say it's hard to learn as an adult if you were never exposed to or interested in music when you were
it,
exposed to it at a
it's a
young
different
age.
learning process at that point. It's like trying to learn a
Mhm.
language when you're 3 or 4 versus trying to learn a language when you're 30 or 40.
Mhm. Yeah, but even just looking at like how much of a difference there is in my, ability to play anything right now versus what it was 15 years ago when I was first getting my bass and I hadn't played, anything except a little bit of guitar over the years and all that. I hadn't played, keys in forever. I mean, I feel like I was almost not even a musician anymore by the time when I was just starting to get back into it in 2008 or so. But I was just starting to go to, go to some Fish shows in 2009, I guess, and we were starting to go to, those parties at the mountain and seeing all these other musicians and just wanting to get involved with all of it. So I just basically started back in and jumped in with both feet.
Being around musicians is the best way to encourage yourself musically.
Yeah. And again, I have lots of musicians in the family, so cousins and uncles, and again my parents, and there was always music around, so there was always musical influence in the house, and a lot of it again was classical, but we also did rock later on, nothing crazy, but just branching out. And again, my sister was a Springsteen fan, and I started to not very much like Springsteen. I was listening to more things like Pink Floyd at
How
that point in
can you
time and Led
live
Zeppelin.
in Jersey and not like Springsteen? Blasphemy.
It's allowed. It's allowed. I mean, I don't necessarily make it well. No, like I don't walk into the bar and say, "Turn that shit off." I mean, I could, but I don't because it's not very
Well,
nice.
do you at least like Bon Jovi?
I mean, sure. It's not like, I don't go nuts over it, but, I'll sing along, especially, if the bar's going into it and there's, singing, living on a prayer or something. Sure. I'll join in, why not? I'm a sociable guy
All
like
right.
that. But it's again, with Springsteen, the main thing was his voice just always kind of grated on me. Like the way it's almost like a forced sounding. It almost sounds like he's hurting
Yeah.
himself. And even if somebody's doing a Springsteen tribute band, like they can do a Springsteen cover, they can do it if they can do it their way and the singer's not trying to make himself sound like that. Like if the singer's just singing it his own way, that's great. But if he's trying to sound like Springsteen, making the sound like that, I'm not a fan of that. Sorry, Bruce. Not I know you're a fan. I know you watch, but it's just one of those things. I'm sorry.
We'll let you still live in Jersey.
Thank you. Nothing personal.
So that was from Pierre Giorgio Wilson over on YouTube. Got us a glimpse at different types of prodigies. from
Indeed.
a parental perspective.
And the violinist, one in particular, she was playing along to a piano. Such emotion in
Yeah.
the playing. I mean, it's not just hitting the right notes, especially on a violin like that. I mean, there's a lot that goes into making that note, sing
Well,
like that.
yeah,
So it's
violin is especially hard. I've had several guitarists that I know who tried violin because they thought, oh, I can play guitar, then I can play violin. Oh my God,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not the same thing.
I would sooner take somebody who plays fretless bass or fretless anything. If you've played anything fretless before and then switch to the violin, you'll probably have a much
Yeah.
easier time. I think the tuning is also different, if I'm not mistaken. But I think once you get over the fact that the tuning is different, I think you're fine. I think it would just be, again, certain phrases that you can do on a fretless bass would still be the same phrase. Like anything you could do on a single string on a fretless bass, you could do on a single string on a violin. Just think of it as a much smaller neck. It's like it would be like toy size compared to what you're used to. So you just have to do much smaller movements, but you understand at least, and you can follow. You're used to following your ear if you're used to playing a
If I'm
fretless.
trying to do a bowed instrument like that, I'm more inclined to go with like a cello or a viola before
Yeah,
before
or
going
a
to
big
a
double bass.
tiny little violin.
I would try any of them, honestly, but like the one that's at the studio over there in Pennsylvania, there's a bass, a big old bass on the wall that has a bow there as well. So I could practice with the bow, but I just basically picked it up and just started playing, just like it was, just to try
Well,
it out, and
bow
it's cool.
techniques in itself is complicated. That's where I think the violinist, the guitarist who tries a violin, has a tougher time getting comfortable bowing than they do fretting.
In certain ways, yes, and in certain types of passages, but it also depends what you're trying to do. Because if you've ever watched an orchestra play, you've seen parts where the violins are going like they're going back and forth very quickly, and that's like a staccato passage where they're just trying to get these little notes to come out one after another. Ta, 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 ta. But you also know that if they do these long sweeping passages where they're going getting like a long note out and they're doing a long draw with the bow, sometimes they have to go and then turn around and come back like on the same note because they're trying to sustain a note for so long. So that's the difficult parts of the technique. Like getting those nuances down is really what it would come down to. But the way the notes sing, like the way you get that kind of a warble in the note, more of that is you'll see them on the hand that they're fretting with
Shaking it.
do like that
Yeah.
that shake, that back and forth, and that's where the emotion really gets into the note, and the intensity of the the note is about how hard you're pushing the
Well,
bow
and,
and
and
how
guitars
hard you're pushing the
guitars
bow and how fast it's
guitars
going.
do that, so that should be feel natural, just a little
Right, but again,
smaller.
it's the fretless. Exactly, it's the fretless nature and the fact that it's so small. The fact that the distance you're thinking about, if you're trying to do like the first three notes of a major scale, for example, in A major, and you're trying to play it, you would probably be hitting them way too far apart if you're used to playing on a fretless bass. But you would at least understand how far apart they should be. So if you think about playing it in the higher register, like playing an octave higher on the fretless bass, and then you map that onto the violin, now you're actually in the right neighborhood as far as how far you should
Yeah,
be moving.
tiny claws.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because especially if you look at a bass, even a 4-string bass, like whatever, if it's two octaves, if you get that full 24 frets, or even a fretless, has the fretboard to get out to where you would be at the double octave, then that top octave really would be kind of similar to the length of a violin, I would think. We'll have to check it out
You
sometime.
could be a prodigy at the violin too.
We'll have to find out. I mean, there's been violin in my family. I have my nephew plays. I have cousins who play. My mother's father was a violin player for sure. Folk music. So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, it works great there.
Oh yeah.
So now we're going to look at what they would call gifted kids that are receptive to learning, and in this case, musical learning.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
This one comes from @Gifted Music School over on YouTube. And what I liked about this is an example of parents and a community kind of taking their own initiative to make a program for musically inclined kids when there's no offerings out there. Parents who take it in their own hands to develop an educational system like this, you know that's what some of our local schools and communities need more of.
Yeah, definitely. The availability of the programs, for sure.
Yeah, well, when the budgets are cutting arts and crafts out of, the education, you got to do something to make sure that that's part of their development.
Yeah. Again, the opportunity to be able to make music and also just being inspired by people making music is also important.
Be around other musicians. It will turn you into a musician.
Exactly. So, Gifted Music School documentary.
Yeah, this is what they did back in 2017.
Nice.
Here before. So we can hear Dave's beautiful tail end there with Mitchell. 1, 2.
When I visited the Gifted Music School, I was really struck by the fact that they're doing it right.
I think they're one of Utah's best kept secrets. Right within our own city, we have a world-class music education program.
People who haven't experienced it can't imagine how valuable it is.
I fundamentally believe that we are all in this together.
Eugene and Vera are the perfect people to do it.
My idea was to just open the school and she executed it. Simple! They teach not only about the music.
We learn theory, we learn solfege, we learn orchestra.
They really teach you how to think, and I think that's the most important thing that I've learned from them.
Our students are now at Holborn, Juilliard, Curtis, but we have students going to Stanford.
Their focus really is to make great citizens.
We teach music so that you have sensitivity. Teaches you, like hard work and commitment and dedication.
We wanted to build the best possible music school here in Salt Lake, and we want to change the lives of so many children.
Ready to jump! Let's do this the same with third finger on the re. Ready? Set. Go! Let's do it one more time.
We at the school believe that music education is one of the most important components of a child's education. When kids have music, they end up doing so much better in life.
On a scan, when students are studying specific subjects in school, different parts of the brain light up. But when they're studying music, every single part of the brain is lighting up. So not only does music enhance emotionally how the child is growing and learning in life, but also physically their brain is growing and every part of their life will be enhanced because they've learned music.
The school was founded because we wanted to create an institution that would create a standard for music education. We really don't have the system here to train kids. Our system here is basically studying with a private teacher who may or may not be qualified, but there are no standards that those teachers are held to.
Music has been cut from public schools, and so the goal is to start bringing that back into the public school system.
We have a school outreach program. We go to elementary schools, middle schools.
The outreach program started at Mountain View Elementary School.
Listen so close, make sure your voice is in tune with what you hear.
They come in after a really long day and they either get violin for an hour or they get music theory, listening, solfege, all of that for an hour as well. So they're getting that every single day for 2 hours. And it's remarkable the progress that they've made.
We have 150 students over at Mountain View Elementary, kids that could never have that opportunity for music education.
I can see in the kids' eyes that it really does change them.
How they played, how their families reacted, and how the room was full of proud people who saw themselves and their families and their futures differently because of the music that their children were bringing to all of them was just infinitely inspiring.
It's really just a joy seeing how it can change the lives of not only children, but their parents, their families.
When they first began music classes at Mountain View, not a single one of these students could match pitch. They're now singing in solfege, and they can sight sing from a music staff in almost every key. We are funding this through the Gifted Music School to start the program in public schools throughout Salt Lake City.
Let me conduct it. 1, 2, 3, ready, set, go. Bum, bum, ba-yum, ba-ba-bum. We need that breath, okay? Be ready for it. It's much more musical if you can breathe at the end of the phrase, okay?
I'm also glad to see that the community of Salt Lake City has an option that is so wonderful.
There's no other program in the country doing what Vera and Eugene are doing here.
They themselves love music and they love the children.
He has a vision and a passion for music education in the lives of children that I don't know that I've ever seen before.
That's what I love, is that Vera and Eugene and all the people involved in this school have had that in their lives, and they're willing to go outside themselves and do the hard work of creating a school with the goal of making our community a better place because of it.
On your shoulder. Good. Very good focus.
I just love seeing other people have the gift that I've been given by my parents. And that's really why I'm involved in this school.
They put their heart and soul into this operation, and it shows.
When you create music together, when you tell stories together, you become a family and you become close friends.
We become so involved with each other's lives and care about each other so much.
Everybody here is passionate about what they do. Everyone here loves these kids.
We want to bring that to every child in the community. We want to make a difference, and we make that difference every single day.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, I'm tearing up a little bit. Like it's so beautiful to like see that kind of musical camaraderie being fostered.
Yeah, exactly, and energy being, redirected into something like that for sure. Yeah.
You want to build a better community. That's a good way to start.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When
I had an aunt and uncle, and cousins lived out in the Salt Lake area for a long time. Visited out there when I was probably, 14 or 15 with my mom, and we went out there. We went skiing out there, out in Alta and Snowbird. Some excellent conditions out there. It was fun.
Well,
good area out there.
They're paying attention to their arts and their community, and bless them for what they're doing. When she said,
Definitely.
like when a kid's playing music, like all elements are firing in the brain, like I was like, yes.
That's what I wanted to talk about also, because that was one that I saw specifically mentioned in other studies about a link with using music to get engagement with autistic children as well. Like, because of the fact that music does engage so much of the brain, it can be in some cases overloading. But if autistic children enjoy the music, that can really help with focus. It can help them calm down. It can help them, filter out other things that are going on. There's a lot of good things that can come from music in an environment like that.
Yeah,
as well.
the results in the studies that they're doing there to see how an autistic child can focus musically, they're doing some great stuff.
Yep. And it's never too late to start learning music theory. And again, you don't need a lot of theory to get a lot of mileage out of a little bit of music theory, because, just going at an instrument from a completely, I know nothing about theory and I know nothing about an instrument. I'm just going to dive in and see where my ear takes me. That can work great for some people. But at the same time, if you understand just a few little bits of theory, you can really get a good jump start on that. Like I was saying, just from major pentatonic and minor pentatonic, if you can figure those two things out, and you can figure out what key you're in and how to make, how to play in different keys on your instrument and follow along with the music that you're hearing, then, you don't really need a whole lot of extra theory unless you're trying to compose music of your own. But if you just want to jam, noodle around and make stuff up, go for it. I mean, nobody's stopping that. It's all about what style of music you're trying.
Yeah, the theory actually helps a lot more for noodling than it does for composing. I mean,
Sure.
We've seen on some of our like composing nights where like some of them have mentioned they don't like to apply their theory when they're trying to come up with the next original composition, because the theory can get in the way. So, it can help more at a foundational level just to get comfortable with an instrument than necessarily write the great composition.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in some cases, it just comes down to trying to be able to jam along to something. Like if you can get something that sounds good going on a little looper, for example, 2-chord loop, a 4-chord loop, whatever, you just get something going around on a looper. or a backing track and just be able to jam by using, something. And that's where the pentatonics come in handy a lot. But even just positions on guitar where you can get it, that if you're playing a certain progression like this, you can just play, these 2 frets. You can just go back and forth between these 2 notes on all the 6 strings. And just go like up and down all the strings, and it's going to sound good like the whole way through. And you can get comfortable with that and just try, jamming around and land in different spots and see how that feels. And you find a couple of spots that are like, yeah, it feels really good when you land there. So you like, that's the one that's going to be the root. And then the second best place where it feels like you land, that's going to be the 5th, and the next best place is the 3rd, So you'll figure that out over time, that just the ones that feel the most settled are those chord tones where it's, you'll see those in the arpeggios. You'll see those, most of the things, most solos people will be doing will be hitting all of those tones a lot, all that kind of stuff.
Like Madonna said, get into the groove.
Yeah. Got to follow that groove. The timing is always important, and being sure your phrases breathe also. Don't be afraid to breathe when you're playing, because a lot of times, a lot of people, they can just, once they start learning some scales, it's just just constant notes all day. But you got to look back at the blues guys, and then you get that phrasing stuff down where you can do a couple of notes and then let that note hang for a bit and then let some space breathe. Then
find those spots where ripping through the scales comes in handy and then complement them with a chord.
Yep. If you're about to like come into the next scale, like there's going to be a transition to somewhere else, like, throw those little moves in there to get to that next spot rather than having the whole time just be because that can get a bit much over time.
Well, and I'm sure they are teaching them the right way to balance that. At Gifted Music School, beautiful story, beautiful objective that they have there. I love that approach.
Yeah,
I'm going to be checking out their development there.
Very cool.
Now, a virtuoso. Mavi is the one who kind of got me searching here, because a virtuoso, would you say, is like, a musician who's just a master at their instrument?
I would say so. It comes down to that, because they can just basically pick up the instrument and just spit out, whatever, whether it's, it should be, some people, they can do just any piece, you could mention a piece name and it's something that they've heard before. They'd be able to just spit it out on the spot. Other people, it would have to be something that they've worked on before, but they would be able to reproduce, you could name any song and they'd be able to work on it and come back to you with it, and play it flawlessly, within a short period of time.
So would you say a virtuoso should be able to play just about any song with their instrument? Like, if they know the song and they know the instrument.
See, some of it comes down to, I know there's a lot of classically trained musicians who, if you were to just tell them, just play me something, just groove along in A major for me, they would be lost. Like if you don't have it on the sheet music for them to read and play from the music, they have nothing. But it's not all classical musicians. This is just something that has to do with the way that they're trained. It's basically they understand how to do scales and all of that, but they're really not trying to improvise with anything they're doing. Everything is about playing certain pieces in a certain way.
They don't actually have songwriting ability. They just have song recognition ability.
Right. And it's more that if you were to hand them some sheet music, it could be something that they've never seen or heard before. You give them the sheet music, they could put it up in front of you and play it flawlessly from the sheet music. But if you were to just say, if you were to just describe it, it's an A major pentatonic run that, whatever, and you kind of describe it to them in that way, they might be able to figure it out, but they're not as apt to do so. Like most of the time it would have to be on the page for them if it's that style of thing. Whereas again, with a virtuoso, it could just be that they spent so much time with the instrument. Somebody like a Victor Wooten, for example,
good example.
Playing the bass from a very young age. I doubt there was a lot of music theory at the very young age, music or reading sheet music or anything. I bet it's a lot more feel involved at that point. Whereas something like with piano, somebody like a Mozart, for example, with piano, it's much more of, there was sheet music involved, there was composition involved when he was, super young and everything else. And I'm sure Victor was writing music very young as well. Again, I just don't know how much of it was formal music training at that point versus just playing and jamming, getting that, getting that feel from what's going on around.
Well, I certainly would call him a virtuoso. Like,
yeah, exactly.
the bass techniques he has are like none I've ever heard.
Yep. And again, a lot of it comes down to just the sheer number of hours of experimentation and, what the exploration was. Because you could sit there and you could say, oh, I spent 20,000 hours playing bass. And it's like, okay, well, if you just played the same thing over and over for 20,000 hours, you'd be really good at playing that. But how, if somebody asked you to jam in the key of G, could you do it? Like it's a question of, did you practice the right things? Did you learn the right things? Did you, build up the right skills, or did you just ingrain bad habits? Like you could have really terrible playing habits that are going to prevent you from playing fast ever, if you play it the wrong way. Like if you're playing with your fingers way out from every note, like you play a note, boom, and then you get your fingers way out of the way, and then you come back in and hit another note. That's a habit that you might pick up when you're playing by yourself, teaching yourself. And if you don't know any better, you might make that the way you play, and you might be able to play really fast at some point in the future, but you would play so much faster if you were playing with a proper.
Well, you want to maximize that 20,000 hours. So your exercises should vary, because if you just do one exercise in the gym all day, you might make your arms bigger, but that's not necessarily going to be good for your overall physique.
And to me, it was just I've always had, a lifelong thirst for learning. Like, I'm always wanting to learn new things. And whether it's music stuff, even if it's a thing that looks like an easy music theory thing, I'll watch it anyway, because it might make a connection click that I hadn't thought about before. Or it might be some piece of music theory that I missed. I might have been snoozing that day when I was going over that or whatever, like something else that I either needed to hear. It's like a lot of times the information comes at just the right time. Like I got just far enough in my music theory to have this conversation about, this interval of chord, or, using this inversion of a chord versus that inversion, and switching from this one to that one and doing these little arpeggios makes it really fast to just do, a very easy way of staying in with a chord progression and following along just by doing these quick little flips of inversions for the chords to keep your hands in the same place. Like we were talking about, a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression, and how that 5, 6, and 4 are all close by, but that one's way over there. So you just use an inversion of that one chord. Now they're all in the same neighborhood, so you can all stay right here. So, doing things like that and figuring things like that and getting smoother at things like that can all really help.
Or like we've said, try a different instrument, because then what you're doing and the inversions and the approach you take is going to be different, because different instruments have a different perspective
and a different role. That's another thing that, with me being a bass guy, a lot of the time, like if I think about, if we have somebody else coming to play bass, like I'm like, yeah, I'll move to guitar or keys. I'm not as familiar with what a guitar player or keyboard player is supposed to be doing in the song. Like I'm so used to being on the one and on, and keeping the pulse of the song going, that if I'm on rhythm guitar, I should be in sync with whoever's playing bass now. But it's not my job to drive. Like I have to, I'm free to like break away and solo. I'm not used to that.
Sometimes it can be, depending on how the bass is being used. And in funk, it definitely is your job to drive.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, and I'm not used to those little chirp chords, like choop, 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 like whatever you're doing, for chords and all that kind of stuff, getting comfortable with that, or whether I'm playing keys, if I'm doing, like held chords, or if I'm doing little chop chords or whatever, figuring that kind of stuff out and how that groove should fit in with a different bass player. Because sometimes we play and there's a guy who has a very Grateful Dead style on his bass playing. He does like a lot of wandery bass lines for us. And so if we get into a jammy kind of song like that, I'll be on the keys, and we have, somebody's doing guitar solos over here. Joey's doing a guitar solo over here while we have, drums going on, and we have the bass player grooving over there. And then I can just do something on the keys where I'm just kind of hanging out in a spot. And then if I just go into a solo, it all just kind of fits together, just because, again, I can hear or feel what pentatonic should work right then. And I just kind of start into that and explore up and down. And, again, figure out, get the spacing and the timing and do the call and response, like try to add all these elements in without thinking about it too much, because you don't want to have to follow a formula, and you don't want to say, oh, I want to tick this box and tick that box. It's just, knowing what the options are and just pulling from that bag and, making something that sounds good for that little chunk that you're playing.
He's a wanderer. A wanderer.
Yeah, got to wander around.
Sometimes you do. So we're going to be going over to Rick Beato. You know how much I love this channel.
Absolutely.
And it is everything music on this channel. He just keeps growing and growing. 4 million subscribers. Go, Rick.
Nice. Yeah.
And no matter what topic we seem to have, like, he has covered it all at one time or another.
Oh yeah, it's in there.
But for this one, I wanted to see, what the definition of a virtuoso is from, like, a legit source.
Let's see what Rick has to say.
era of virtuosos. Because of YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, you can see virtuosic performances by people from all over the world on all different instruments. When I was growing up, occasionally you would see a performance like this on Ed Sullivan of a young Yitzhak Perlman. Or even this performance by Oscar Peterson, essentially giving a masterclass on the Dick Cavett Show, another one of the biggest talk shows of the 70s.
Sweet Georgia.
Yeah.
If you invent something as an alternative line,
Yeah.
then you can play the same thing with two hands.
Can you imagine seeing something like that on Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon? A player like Oscar Peterson giving a master class with the host asking them questions about how they reharmonize things or how they play two-handed octave lines. Now, getting back to virtuosity, because of these learning tools like YouTube and Instagram, Facebook, any kid anywhere in the world can go on at any time and watch any of the masters from the 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way through today. And they can learn the techniques that they never would have ever been exposed to when I was a kid. You never even heard these things or let alone seeing them. Just like seeing Eddie Van Halen tapping the first time. When people heard it, they didn't know what it was. It's actually an incredible time. There are guys like Rick Graham, for example, who's a great guitarist who's on YouTube and Instagram giving away his ideas about technique and playing for free. Now, virtuosos have been around since the beginning of Western music. If you think about it, all the greatest composers like Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, Paganini, you don't have to have heard recordings of them. You just have to look at their music and read contemporaneous accounts of their playing. People said that Paganini was possessed by the devil and had 4 joints in his fingers because they were so mesmerized by his playing. That was violinist Jascha Heifetz playing Paganini's 24th Caprice. Let's check out some other great classical virtuosos. Now, these artists only have the music that the composers wrote for them, which happen to be these incredibly virtuosic works that only the greatest players can play. Kissin was just playing the Chopin Opus 28 Prelude in B-flat minor. And you have to be a virtuoso to play these pieces, especially at those kind of tempos. Now, what makes jazz, fusion, and rock completely different than classical music is that you're actually improvising. Or at least you're trying to improvise. So this type of virtuosity has a second component, which is equal, if not more important, which is inventiveness. What are they playing in these fast passages? If you slow them down, will it have the same effect, or will it be even more impressive? I say yes. The people that are true virtuosos, if you slow down their playing to have speed, the stuff becomes even more incredible. Let's listen to some jazz, fusion, and rock players. Think about it. We live in a time where any of these videos are available for anyone at any time to learn from. Virtuosity isn't always just about breakneck speed. This clip of George Benson is virtuosic because it is grooving so hard. I'll take that clip any day over the fastest shredder guitarist out there. Remember, it's not how fast you play, it's what you play when you're playing fast. That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. If you're interested in the Beato book, go to my website at www.rickbeato.com. Remember, subscribe to my Instagram, which is @rickbeato1. Thanks for watching.
Oh, I knew he would explain it properly.
Yep, there you go.
And who knew
Absolutely.
Who knew Paganini was a stoner? 4 joints. No, but
4 joints and everything.
It's true though. His fingers were like mutant fingers.
Like those fast ones. Now, Django Reinhardt is another one that, as far as like he was a gypsy jazz guitar player who had lost the use of 2 of his fingers, so he's basically doing all these lines with only 2 fingers on his fretting hand. So he's doing all these fast moves where he's doing these lines that sound very complicated, sound like he's fretting up like a storm over there, but it's basically just using 2 fingers and going back and forth while he's going up very fast.
And he does more with 2 fingers than a lot of guitarists do with all 5. He's got Tony Iommi beat.
Exactly.
Tony only lost a little nub.
Yeah, Jerry Garcia also, but that was on the picking hand.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's about making it work.
On the picking side, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. I mean, it still would be though. I wouldn't want to lose anything on my hands.
Yeah, it would be a big difference for piano, like as well, like you're saying.
Well, those examples he showed there, like, and I love that he emphasized it wasn't just about the speed, because you do think with virtuosos, it feels like it's all about the speed, but what you're actually playing, like he said, is more important.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of times, seeing as people progress, they get from being able to play something and they can play something musical, and then suddenly they are able to play so fast because they're able to, double their speed very quickly, because all of a sudden you get into, once you lock down the mechanics of being able to pick very quickly and and getting, being able to go back and forth like that with the picking hand, all of a sudden now what are you doing with the fretting hand to make that work? And you can all of a sudden double that speed if you're adding in open strings in between all of that. So there's a number of different tricks you can do to basically quickly double and quadruple your speed once you get confident with what you're actually playing. So that's where, understanding the notes, understanding what you want to play, and understanding the space, being able to put that space in to leave, let the song breathe. That's the important thing to me.
Yeah, and as he mentioned, like improv is the beginning of becoming a virtuoso, but inventiveness really is a sign of the virtuosos. Their ability to invent more than improv, to come up with new techniques, like Eddie doing the finger tapping. I mean, it's not to say that it wasn't done before, but certainly the way he did it was inventive, and it became a staple in his sound.
Mm-hmm. And if you go somewhere where there's an open jam, for example, and you jump up to play with a bunch of people, and it's just, what are you guys going to play? And it's like, okay, let's just do a jam where we play, G and C and D, and then back to the G. And like, we're just going to go around with that. And you start into it. And, that could turn into a million different things depending on who's on stage with you, because some people, they'll just sit there and they'll just, thump on that G and then thump on a C and then thump on a D and then come back. Other people, they're going to work with that as a chord progression, bounce off each other, and turn it into a whole thing where, it's building up in intensity and then it, breaks down. And then, like all these different things are happening as all interactions between the musicians. It's something that, depends on who's on stage. You get.
That's where some of the dynamics of the song actually start to come out by those who are bouncing around like that, improving, giving it rise, fall kind of feel.
And even, being able to give signals on stage where, okay, you go, like, his turn is he's going to start a solo, and then he goes off onto a whole thing for a couple of rotations. And then as soon as his comes down, like we build it up for him. And then as soon as he breaks out of that, then it's the next guy, you go, then it goes to the keys and he goes, being able to get those kind of communications to happen just through like, nods or, eyebrows. You're like,
Yeah. Well, you got to get your, you got to get your musical face on.
Yeah. And even if you're not looking at somebody, like, a lot of times I'll spend a lot of time looking at my hand while I'm playing bass. But if somebody's trying to give me a signal from over here, like I can signal to them that I hear them. Like I give them, like I'm looking up at them, even if I'm not looking right at them, like they'll see that I'm acknowledging that I'm seeing them. I'm like, oh yeah, I see you.
Just don't give me a stinky face.
No need for that. We're all on the same team.
Those are the faces we avoid.
It's all about a unified front when you're on stage. That's right. There's no bickering on stage, no fighting on stage. It's, once we're up there, we're a team and we're all in it together. So like, if someone's just going to stop mid song, we're just going to keep going because we're going to ride it out, because you don't stop. That's one thing. So like if the drummer stops, that's fine. This is just the part where the drummer sits out for a second, but we're going to keep that groove rolling until he rolls back in. And then we put a proper end on it, and then we can talk about it. But we'll talk about it when we're off stage, because while we're on stage, unified front, you're like, yeah, good job, everybody happy, okay, good. Later on, be like, don't stop, man. Don't ever stop.
I'll kick a band member's ass if he stops.
In the middle of train wrecking something, like if you guys start into something, I've seen it happen where sometimes a band starts into something and it's one of these complex timing songs, and the drummer happens to, the drummer and the whoever's doing rhythm, they come in off sync where, he's on the 3 and he's on the 1, and it's never going to resolve itself unless one of them or everybody like jump ship. But like everybody's on board with this guy, and then this guy's off, and is it ever going to resolve, or is this going to be a train wreck? It's going to be a mess. So sometimes we'll just like, wait, like let's all start together on the 1.
If everybody stops, it's accepted.
You still don't want to. I mean, like the rule is you should never just all stop, but it would be better if whoever, like, if most of the people are over here with this guy, like everybody should jump on board with them. And so it's if the drummer's off by half a beat or whatever, like he should just put an extra couple in there, and he'll be back on where he should be, bringing it back around like that. But then it's how many times have we done it now? Like, oh, are we on the 3rd time around already?
So a good drummer should be conducting that.
Well, yeah, and a good band, they'll be ready to just keep that vamping around until everybody's on the same page, and then okay, let's start right here. Okay, good.
So
it's all about the signals.
I knew Rick was going to explain Virtuoso for me. Awesome job.
Yep. Always good stuff.
And to shift, now we're going to look at a savant. Unusual story. Banged his head. Turns out he's a musician. And this does happen. I feel like I've experienced somewhat the same thing, not to the same extremities, but I've seen what, like, a big headbang can do to change your personality, change your interests, your skills. I felt that after that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this one comes from WMX Presents. Yep, at WMX Presents over on YouTube. Channel for creativity, music, art, and entertainment. Sounds like our kind of channel.
Sounds good to me, for
and
sure.
He's got a Matchbox 20. I just finished doing this song the other night. It's
Nice.
kismet.
You read your mind.
Well, Derek Amato, as I mentioned before, you will find his story across YouTube. Many have studied this as an example of, like, having that kind of accident and side effects that can happen. Some good, some bad.
Exactly.
But like they ask here, if you were given a superpower that came with debilitating side effects, would you want that superpower?
Again, depends on the power of the superpower and how debilitating the side effects are.
Well, a musical superpower in this particular case.
But I think the idea is, don't try this at home, kids. Don't go out and, seeking head trauma to see if you can turn yourself into a musician. That's the main idea. but we are, investigating how the head trauma, by investigating how the head trauma caused this type of effect, it gives a window into which sections of the brain are most involved in his case.
Yeah, what possibly could lead to a savant in an artistic skill from this kind of situation?
Yeah, like we were talking about before, if certain sections of the brain are damaged, it can be, like you said, entire other areas of the brain take over and maybe better at what they we're trying to do. Maybe they have better access to the memories that are near there, makes it easier to learn different things. It can be a lot of different reasons.
Or takes a different approach to the thought process, where all of a sudden it gets easy because this part of my brain understands what I'm doing.
Right, exactly. It could be better connectivity, all that kind of stuff can be factored.
So let's learn a little bit about Derek Amato.
Sudden musical genius.
This gift isn't for everyone, I don't think. It's exhausting.
The thing with Derek is that he's an anomaly. He's literally 1 in 8 billion people.
If this would have happened to most people, it probably would have just shut them down.
It's a gift, but nobody knows what the long-term consequences are.
Sometimes people actually kind of treat me like a superhero, and what they don't realize is that there is a dark side to this gift. I had never touched a piano. I was a regular kid. I played baseball and chased girls, like boys do. I dove into a swimming pool 9.5 years ago to catch a football, and I hit my head in the shallow end of the pool. Basically, when I got back from the hospital, I slept for 5 days. On the 5th day, I woke up, and that's when I walked up to the piano. It was dusty. I knew nothing of it, how to play it, and I was just hoping to hit a couple notes, and that's when my hands just kind of went crazy, and I was playing fluid. It was instant. There was no building up or rehearsing or practicing. I don't even remember being really shocked. I was just kind of like something profound was happening.
I don't know where the music comes from. I can tell you that Derek couldn't do it before. And it's amazing, it really is. It brings tears to people's eyes.
It's almost like the ghost of Beethoven jumped into my body, right, and took over, and I just kind of went crazy.
He has a fluidity of movement that a lot of early players struggle with.
It's about a 1 in 100 million chance that somebody's going to go have a head injury and have some kind of acquired savant skills.
Depending on how proficient a musician a person wants to be, we know from lots of studies that you need to put in the hours. The extraordinary part of his story is this fact that it seemingly happened overnight.
Derek's example is one of unlocking his brain's potential, and unfortunately it's associated with side effects.
I've always thought there's nothing in this world that can make you feel like you don't want to be on this earth. Sometimes the headaches are so bad, I'm almost begging to just not even have to be alive to deal with it.
I worry about his headaches. They seem to be debilitating, and they can last for days.
I've had extreme migraines since my accident, loss of hearing, memory loss, light and sound sensitivity.
It's the brain's job to filter out external stimuli. Sometimes it happens too in the midst of a head trauma or something else that's causing the brain to fire excessively. There's so much information that comes in that it overloads the filtering mechanism.
When I go out in the real world, it's like overstimulation. Every noise is heightened. It's sometimes too much to where I just can't take it. I've collapsed and passed out several times in the last 9 years.
I'm in my room and I heard wham, and he went down. When I walked into the bathroom, Derek was sitting in the tub and he had blood coming out of his nose.
Since I woke up with the immediate ability to play the piano, I see these non-stop geometrical squares that go left to right in my mind's eye. And it's not repetitive music going in a circle, just like one song. Each one of these squares maybe have a lot of notes to each square rather than just one note.
Derek sees white and black blocks in his brain 24/7, and another part of Derek's brain is interpreting that as music. If we can find the precise neural areas in Derek's brain responsible for his talents, then hopefully we can develop a pill that can regenerate that in ordinary individuals.
It's almost as if someone just basically plugged a super intense musical stream into my brain. It's 24 hours, non-stop composition, even when I'm sleeping.
Some people with synesthesia can smell color. In Derek's case, he can actually see sound.
The squares tell my fingers where to go. And since I don't understand where a D minor is or an F sharp, if it's in those blocks and squares, I'm hitting that D minor and I don't even know it. And I don't capture every note that I see. I don't think it's possible.
It's a gift, but nobody knows what the long-term consequences are.
Doctors have suggested that I try taking anti-seizure medication, and my choice is absolutely not. Why would I want to take a synthetic product that could possibly cloud this whole process or even make it go away? I'm not willing to take that chance. I think my abilities are insisting that not only people, but doctors and everybody looking in reevaluate what simply is possible.
Dude, I really got to check out those human limits videos. I'm so into that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, his story, like, of never playing piano to, it's a little more drastic than your typical story, but it goes to show, like, the possibility of a skill being kicked in by something like a head bump, or what they're suggesting, possibly like a musical pill. If they came out with a musical pill tomorrow, is it something you would consider?
Me, no. But for somebody who has, always wished that they could do music and doesn't have a musical bone in their body, if they could suddenly take a pill and be able to suddenly jump in and get started when they had difficulty with it in the past, maybe they would be interested in it for sure.
So that would kind of be like a musical Ritalin kind of approach, where it's like, oh, take this and parts of your brain that are musical might kick in.
That's part of it. Yeah. It's kind of like we talked about that window, like if somebody wasn't exposed to music in that window when they were young, and they try to learn music now, if they've sat down and said, I've literally tried, like I've gone online, I've looked at piano lessons and I sat at a piano and I tried it and I just couldn't do it mechanically, or guitar or singing or whatever, any way that they tried to express themselves and they've been trying different ways. If there suddenly became something, like that, they might be interested in a pill like that. But again, for me, it would be something that I wouldn't want to mess around, chemically like that when I already understand music pretty well. And I mean, I could get better, of course, but to me, it's a lifelong process. And I feel like I'm far enough along in my journey on several different instruments and understanding of how, music is made on different instruments and how it all comes together, that I wouldn't want to interfere with that in a chemical way.
It takes us back to last week when we watched that video on the influences of THC in creativity.
Sure. Yeah. I would say that is more of a temporary thing, but sure.
Well, that's more of a mood adjustment. So if you are musical, experimenting with drugs might adjust your musical like tastes or perception. In this case, if you're not musical and you take something that starts to kick in parts of your brain that might make it easier to learn an instrument, I mean, it's I'd want to see massive testing before they just started rolling out something like that, because I could see a lot of people like being guinea pigs.
To me, the main thing is that so many people have been exposed to music throughout their lives, whether it's at that critical period when they were young or not, and whether they feel like they're musical or not. I think anybody can be musical if they really want to. And it's just really comes down to if they're willing to put in, some time to study. And it's not that, you have to put in the 10,000 hours before you're going to enjoy any of it. You can really start enjoying playing right away. It's about the methods that you use. And I've seen some, some piano guys
So if you
online.
could take a pill that like was proven to turn you into Rachmaninoff all of a sudden, that would
I still wouldn't be interested. No. Again, to me, it's to try to anything that's a shortcut like that to me isn't worth it. Like to me, getting to that point, like I'd love to be at that point of piano playing, and I know that there are some online teachers who claim that they could get you there in
Yeah.
2 months just based on certain things, and it's probably true because it really is just a matter of I already have the understanding of how these things work. Like we talked about the doing a circle of fifths exercise, going around and picking a chord progression that you like and just playing it around in every key, going from around the circle of fifths, getting comfortable with how to play them all on the piano. As you get more comfortable with that exercise, you're literally working out playing in every one of those keys, maybe only those 4 chords, sure, but for being able to play a progression in all 12 keys around the circle means that all of a sudden you shouldn't be intimidated by anything, because any song that you want to play, it's you've played in that key before. It's like, oh yeah, you can jump over here and just do the
Well,
same thing.
and I'm with you. I wouldn't want to go the fake route. I don't want my muscles because I pump myself full of steroids. I want my muscles because I built them up.
Right. And in this case, it's something that it's it doesn't take as long as we all think it does. Like people think it's going to take years and years before you see any progress. And with some things, like when I first started playing the bass, I wanted to play all the time because I got the bass, I got books to look at, I got songs I wanted to work on, I was watching videos, like all this kind of stuff, but my hands couldn't take it. Like I literally couldn't physically play for more than half an hour or an hour at a time before my hands were getting tired, because I had never played stringed instruments for any period of time before. So I had to play a little bit and then put it down, and I was sitting there wishing I could play more, but my hands weren't up for it. So I would learn more while I'm watching stuff. But as I built up calluses and all of a sudden I'm able to play, like now I could literally play for hours and hours. I mean, on Wednesdays, I go to one studio in the morning for a couple hours, then I go to another studio for a couple hours, then I go play out later that night. It's a matter of, and it doesn't even get to the point where I get, build up a blister or calluses or anything. But sometimes if I'm playing like really fast parts, like dugga, 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 and I'm going back and forth like that on the bass, sometimes you'll start building up a callus or what have you. But it's not like I can't play, and it's not like my fingers ever bleed from ripping my fingers apart or anything. It's just one of those things that I can now play as long as I want to, because I built it up over time.
You've definitely become a musical bodybuilder.
Exactly. And just from playing like a little bit every day is important. And some days I play hours, whether it's a little, 5 minutes here and an hour there and whatever. Some days I don't play at all, but for the most part, I try to play every day, at least a little bit.
I'm always playing in my mind.
That's the other thing, thinking about it while you're away from it. Yeah. Or you're listening to you hear a song in a movie, or you hear doesn't have to be a song even. It can just be a series of notes that you're like, ooh, I like the way that sounded. What was that exactly? And try to figure out what it was.
Yeah. In that last video, when they were talking about like how he was perpetually thinking, and they showed that little clip, his hand moving while he was sleeping.
Right.
Again, I totally relate with that, because since that accident, I do this almost constantly, usually on my lap.
What I was fascinated by there especially was the fact that he, even as he's playing those things, he doesn't understand what the music theory is that he's playing. It's just that his brain is basically telling him, hit these notes and it'll sound good, but he doesn't know why or what the theory is behind it. So it's not like it shifted him into, it didn't just suddenly deposit a whole musical encyclopedia.
I always felt like an antenna got turned on. When it started to happen to me, it was like an antenna turned on, and all those musical ideas that are out there just started coming in like a radio.
Yeah, started tuning into them. Yeah.
And when
radio's a good reference,
when you let your fingers go like that, and you let them do their thing. That way, it's kind of like you're just a conduit of the music.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's where you're more about, channeling it. Yeah.
That's what I did after. Like, I used to try to play something, and then all of a sudden I was playing something with no actual pre-thought going into it. Like, just, ooh, fingers are doing stuff. Whoa, sounds cool.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And that's a place that I always wanted to get to with music. Like when I was taking piano lessons as a kid, I was, again, learning how to play certain classical pieces, and I would learn, I'd do my scales, do my exercises, but it was never about just making music. It was never about just jamming. It was never about just sitting down and exploring as much. And so eventually I just lost interest in it because it was, not the kind of music that you would usually listen to. I was listening to rock music, and, there's keys in rock music, but I was never learning how to play keys in rock music.
And
never made that connection.
And trying to play a song was how I used to approach music. Like I'd be trying to play something, trying to play like something, which was all theory driven and was work. After that, it was like, whoa, I don't have to try to play a song. There are songs that are just coming through, and I shifted from trying to duplicate to just, oh, this is what comes out my fingers when I don't put any pre-thought into what I'm going to do. It's the
And for me, part of it was, again, going back to
the freestyle approach.
Going back to blues on the bass, and bass being an easy section of music to work with, and the blues being a very simple structure to work with.
Oh, did I chop up or you?
Understand. And as soon as you start into a song, you understand exactly what's going around, and it helps.
Oh, the dingo ate my baby there for a second.
I think it ate both our babies. I think we have time for one more, though, before they completely cut you off.
Damn, Elon, leave my internet alone.
Yeah, he's taking your stuff.
Well, at WMX Presents, I will be back for that Matchbox 20 later. I like this. Yeah, I like this channel. I like that story. It makes me think about, the possibilities of where music is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And whether it's got a negative impact. Perfect one to finish off. I mean, we saw, like, children's perception of music and how music plays a part in development. And this discussion is about possible negative influence in development.
Mm-hmm. And this one's coming from?
This is a manned up conversation. Conversations.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Yep, at Manned Up Convos over on YouTube.
Can music have a negative influence on children?
Yeah, and again, he asks questions.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more for tonight.
We often hear about as well is the dangers of music, right? Of the music culture that's out there now because of the images, I suppose, and some of the lyrics in there. How much of that do you think holds true?
That's a tough one. Most music in the world, I think, popular music, is about love and love songs. So if music had that profound effect and was able to really change, the whole world would just be in love with each other. Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah.
But teenagers and music, part of our identity. It's a big part. I know for me, growing up, I grew up listening to a lot of jazz, but as a teenager, I rebelled and started listening to heavier rock and punk and things like that.
Yeah.
The music was negative. It was aggressive. But you know what? It empowered me. It made me feel stronger at a time when I felt quite disempowered in other places.
Yeah.
There are definitely instances, you hear these stories in America of these like terrible school shootings and how they were listening to this kind of music. Did the music make them do it? I don't know. You know, I get the impression that they were already on that path. And as I said to you, we use music to help change our moods, and maybe it enhanced that mood. But I don't know how damaging music can be. I think there are probably elements of it that can be dangerous, let's say. But I think, you know, we live in a dangerous life. and I don't know, you know, I don't believe in censoring too much music. I had this issue as well, and I still don't know how to deal with it. When I started at the children's home, and there were quite a few kids into hip-hop at the time. There were a lot of older teenagers. And they were bringing in music that I felt quite uncomfortable with at the time. That was quite misogynistic. That was about things that were not meaningful to me, that were about wealth, flaunting wealth, about materialism, about, you know, stuff like that. Sure. And this is what they were listening to. And I had to really think hard about it. It doesn't mean much to me. And to me, I actually got a little bit anxious listening to this stuff and thinking, is this what they're aspiring to? But as I said to you earlier, I'm not here to change people. I can't. My life is so different to what those kids grow up with. That music is empowering them. They are in a super disadvantaged situation. If this is making them feel powerful and good, who am I to say this is wrong? It's not wrong. So again, all I can do is model and get them to ask questions.
Yes, sir.
To ask questions. That's all I can do. And to interrogate what they're listening to, why they're listening to it. But it's not up to me to say what's good and bad and what's right and wrong. I don't have that power.
Yep, that's right. It's all about the listener. Music is in the ear of the listener.
I love the balance of his answer there. And that, you know, music is subjective. So to determine like whether this is a good message or a bad message, one parent's opinion might not be the same opinion to another, and each kid's different. So parents got to know their kid to determine whether they're hearing something that's bad for them.
Yeah. And again, a lot of it, to me, a lot of it came down to things like rap battles or things like that, where, you know, where there's an antagonistic component to it, where it's a fight. You know, you got two people up there and they're both going at each other. And to me, like, that's never what music has been about. And that's just because of, you know, my interpretation of music. The way it's not saying that this is right and that's wrong. It's just saying that, you know, I wouldn't go out of my way to make something like that, because to me, music is about cooperating. Like, I'd rather get people and make music together where we're making something in common, you know.
But the music you listen to as a teenager that he was describing there, you might not have been a musician yet. And the music you listen to, like he mentioned, as he became a teenager, he started to listen to harder music, rock and punk, which now you're shifting from music that might be more group incentive and benefit to rebellious, sometimes aggressive, harder styles of music, and the influence it can have on a kid at that age is the difference between going and being a jock or growing long hair and getting up on stage.
Yeah. And me at 17 and 18 and 19, I was at Pink Floyd shows. I saw Grateful Dead shows. I believe I saw Skynyrd. I've seen the Allman Brothers. I mean, I've seen a number of different bands, but I think the band I've seen the most over recent years is Fish, for sure. I mean, I've seen a lot of Fish shows, a couple dozen at this point. And just, you know, the sense of community and all the music that, you know, that's all, you know, excellently done. So a lot of different reasons why I go to concerts like that. But it's just again, when I was very young, there it was the Pink Floyd, it was the Grateful Dead, it was music like that I enjoyed. Led Zeppelin was always huge in my car, and having cassettes and having CDs in the car. It was always Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, and like I said, Allman Brothers. Could be Tom Petty. I mean, there's a lot of different things that all
Well,
go into there.
some of those ones you mentioned, definitely, I'd say like drugs were part of the concert going experience.
Mhm.
Would you say music's a drug?
It can be. It's not necessarily because of the fact that there's no real downside to it in my book. Like as far as again, with a drug, if you take too much of it, there's a problem. Whereas with music, I don't see there being. I mean, if you had 4 kinds of music going at once and you're
Well,
trying to follow all that, maybe is a problem. But
if the drug use gets tied to the music, which some would say, like a Dead show,
Mhm.
man, I saw more drugs at a Dead show
Well,
than
sure.
I did in my high school.
They are correlated, but they're not always together. Like there are people at a Dead show and at a Fish show and at a Pink Floyd show who are not on drugs, and it's it's one of those things that it's a very forgiving environment, let's say, as far as if there is drug use happening. I don't think anyone is walking around going, "Hey, put that out," because they see drug use happening. I mean, that shouldn't be happening at a show like that, because people who are there understand where they are and what they're doing.
Let's jump back to the 80s and Tipper Gore and the idea that rock and roll comes with sex and drugs. So therefore rock and roll bad to our kids because sex and drugs are encouraged
I
in
think
rock and roll.
they were looking at rock and roll. I think they were looking at the messages that from rock and roll and looking at rock and roll as a gateway drug to
Well,
actual drug.
and they took it even further to go into metal and say that this kid committed suicide because of the music he was listening to.
Right.
What that guy mentioned there is that a kid who does something, the music that might encourage them, but at the same time is not pulling the trigger. There's underlying factors that you can't blame the music at that point. The real problem lies in how the music was interpreted and the actions of the individual.
Yeah, and in again, usually people would say things like it takes a village to raise a kid or raise a child, right? So there's who was responsible for learning right from wrong, because when it comes to things like that, it's important.
If the whole village decides that this song is evil and will rot our kids' brains, so we're gonna burn it in a fire in the middle of the village.
Footloose.
If the whole town comes up with that consensus, would you still agree with that approach to
I'm not a big fan of a whole town telling anybody.
musical freedom? Because they burned albums and books simply for the sake of too dangerous.
See, that's the thing, is I don't think any ideas are necessarily too dangerous to exist. So destroying them isn't necessarily the answer. Like understanding, not necessarily teaching you don't necessarily want to take it and put it on a pedestal. You don't want to be talking about it every day. If there are things that you want people not to follow, like there's music that you think is bad, rather than harping on it every day and putting it out there so that it's always in the news or whatever, it would be better to basically focus on a little disclaimer of why it's bad and what would be a better way to go about it. I mean, I'm sure there's music that's not that bad that you would consider that is similar enough that would be interesting to the people who like that music, for example.
Well, and like he said at the very end, who am I to say this is good or bad to somebody else?
Right.
You have to be humble enough to recognize that even if all of us think this is horrible message, dangerous to our kids for them to hear, burning it in that approach is not the best solution. Teach your kids that this is bad. Teach them to say that's garbage. I don't want to hear it.
And again, anything that would end up in a situation like that, any music that is that bad, I mean, it's not just that it's, it's a little out of tune and a little pitchy and a little repetitive. I mean, we're talking about, a bad message being sent, for example, or glorifying
a little bitchy.
Well, again, it could be things like glorifying, like they mentioned, things like, misogyny, or things like, violence against, people and things like that. I mean,
90% of hip hop these days.
I understand. And that's what I'm saying is like, people can, make that argument that, they don't like the idea of glorifying those ideas. I mean, when you got to the materialism at that point, that's, a whole different story. That's, another way of looking at it. But like to me, the bigger problems would be things like misogyny and violence and things like that, because I'm not into those as messages. I like to avoid that kind of stuff. But again, it has to do with what you're surrounded by in your environment as well. If you're in an environment where there's constant violence everywhere and it's all about how much, what you have materially and, how you treat people around you, in bad ways to make yourself seem larger or whatever, there's, that's not something that's in the environment that I'm in. So it's not something that I, would have on my, in my vibe, that's not the way I, am. But I don't hold it against somebody else because they do. I might be surprised by it. I might, not want to, glorify it if somebody else is doing it. I might not seek out their music and things like that because I don't resonate with the message. That was the word I was looking for. Resonate.
How you write about materialism as an artist to your audience, you can take the hip hop approach and try to look big, even though you're not, and write about like the materialism of how rich you are, or you can take the Pink Floyd approach and write about money, and that works awesome and creates a classic song. Whereas like bragging about how much money you wish you had and you're trying to look like it isn't as convincing to a musical audience.
And
The
I
kid,
was thinking more even the cautionary tale of, the person who had $1 million and ended up losing it all, like a story song, talking about somebody who, rose in, fortune and then, fell hard because of whatever,
or
and then
or
the
or
lesson
the
that
lo-
comes back from
or
that.
the love song of if I had $1 million,
Mhm. Exactly.
and turn it into like, how you use that topic
Mhm.
in your writing is the difference between whether you're writing a bad message or a fantastic message.
Exactly. And that's why I wouldn't want to condemn an entire, genre of music or entire style or any of that, because again, there could be very good examples of, good messages or messages that are, bad, but it's bad against a bad character, in a story, for example, it could be, but, again, it's about what message that you resonate with, that you want to listen to and follow. Most of the music that I listen to is, happy jam music or, psychedelic, music that, 23-minute long songs that are instrumentals, things like that, that kind of stuff I enjoy. And so that's what I like to listen to. It's not necessarily all jazz stuff. Sometimes I'll throw some jazz on there and start listening to that. It's more of a recent thing, but
Well,
it's all just a question.
you never judge a genre based on a few songs in the genre, right?
Right. Yeah,
Because
exactly.
no few songs or messages could represent a genre.
Right.
True, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but sex and drugs just got appended to the rock and roll. Rock and roll as a genre um, covers a lot more.
Sure. And the thing is also that, I don't think any genre is immune from people who have either a big ego or a bad message. I mean, not that there's examples in every genre, but I don't think any is exempt from it. Like there could be an artist in any style that is, sending a bad message, misogynistic, or is sending a bad message about violence, or is just a bad person, like who, there's constant stories of when their band goes somewhere, they're, mistreating, waiters at this place or whatever, just, there's a lot of different ways people can be crappy about, but while their music is still great, but at the same, that's why to me, it's more the people who, you know, the stories you hear, they're good all around. It's like, oh, they're a great guy. They stopped over here, like they had time for the fans, this and that. Not everybody can be perfect all the time, but it's great when the balance, on balance, they're on the side of the music of the fans and trying to get their music out there and trying to be in support of the people who are supporting them.
And genres tend to go in different waves of like they're in, they're out, they're in, they're out. And the artists who keep those genres alive at certain times, you might hear the same theme over and over again. So like, hip hop in the 90s went through like this bad boy a decade where like everything was rappers going to jail, were the huge ones on the charts because of their notoriety. And it doesn't mean all hip hop is gangster style notoriety, but at the same time, it got associated with it in the 90s because there were so many at the time saying the same message, and people started guilt by association. Oh my God, all hip hop is gangster, rap, which there was a lot of faith hip hop going on at that same time that was getting ignored.
Mm-hmm. Right. And a completely different message, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. And what people were associating, like, oh my God, all hip hoppers are this, is like thinking like all rockers are sex and drugs.
Right. Now, there's also different ways that can work where you could say all hip hop and put a different box around it where if it has to do with the style of the drums or like, having, more about the construction of the song rather than, other than that, trying to put things in boxes. It's more or less just putting it in a certain category. It doesn't have to be about what the lyrics are.
The actual music appreciation, when people start listening to the actual music and say, ooh, that style is this, that goes beyond message. And that's the beauty of genres, is that genres are categorized based on musical styles, not messages.
Right. And when you have something that breaks down as much as, like you were talking about metal before, I mean, how many different subgenres are there of metal? I mean, there's a lot, right? And
some of those
those down.
Some of those subgenres are all about message. Like, oh my God, black metal has to be this, this, and this, and it's all message driven. That subgenre is just like categorizing. Oh, there's the gangster rap. There's the religious rap. They're just making the subgenres to classify messages at that point.
Right. And as opposed to things that are just stylistic or again based about the structure of what makes it that kind of a song.
Yeah, and there's bad messages in every genre. So, like, if we'd have to get rid of every genre if we didn't want to have something where bad messages could come through.
Right. But again, I just happen to prefer, I resonate more with positive messages and, uplifting music, but, of certain styles, like I like rock, I like funk, I like, stuff like that, reggae, like all those kinds of things. Like I always enjoy playing those and, just throwing them on and listening and playing along and, getting into it, figuring out certain things, certain licks and runs.
Well,
and things like that.
they're all party genres. Like, I've never heard a reggae song that didn't make me want to party.
Yeah. And to me, it's about the bounce. Yeah. I mean, it's very, and being a bass driven guy, like going into something like reggae, like you can definitely hear the bass in the reggae because that's very prominent. And so that's something that
same with funk. Funk is just the groovier version of reggae.
Yeah. And that's where, again, we talked about the James Brown funky instrumentals as one of the things I like to, on a Sunday morning, I might just throw that on and, throw the headphones on and grab the bass and just play along to, some instrumental James Brown stuff for like an hour and a half. And then like when you finish that, it's like, you feel well warmed up for the, for playing bass for the day. And also you got your groove on for a little, little time there.
And you can definitely say you exercised.
You get a lot of bounce in a session like that.
Yeah, fuck you, shake weight. James Brown's my exercise.
Yes, indeed. Dancing machine.
That was a fun journey into more psychology. Like the last 2 weeks, we definitely got our psychology on. Big Glenn. I'm as big as you now.
Yes, indeed. But you're over
there. My musical child grew up tonight.
My head exploded.
I figured it would.
Lots of good stuff, though. Some good channels there. Some old favorites again. Some new channels to check out. Good messages around.
Oh, yeah. As far as that gifted school, and seeing some of the development approaches they're doing to get kids into music, really warms my cockles.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, definitely like that.
Well, we will be back tomorrow night with Tatius on Angified Presents.
That's right. And we will see you all next week on Talking Shhh IT with Glenn and Tony. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Until then, see you next time. Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now, for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.